This is if you're new here, this is the Apologetics Academy, which we run every Saturday at this time at about 8 p.m. Greenwich Meridian time, or 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 noon Pacific, and basically we bring in different scholars and experts and apologists on different areas from across the theological and philosophical spectrum to present to us their viewpoint on a particular topic or issue, and then we open it up for open floor Q&A. And there's a number of ways that you can participate in the session. You're currently by default in the viewer section, which means that I'm the only one that can see you. You can participate in the chat window, or you can submit questions anonymously. And if you press the Q&A button, you can submit questions anonymously. Or you can raise your hand. There's a raise your hand button where you can ask to interact live with the speaker and ask questions by engaging your microphone and webcam if you have one. And or you can just sit and listen anonymously and enjoy the show. So this evening, or today, depending where you are in the world, we have with us Aron Ra, who is a well-known atheist in Texas, and he is going to share with us his views on why he thinks that faith is fundamentally dishonest. Do you want to go ahead, Aron, just maybe tell us a bit about your background, perhaps tell us where you're coming from and your views generally on faith and religion? That would be a great start.
Well, thank you very much. I was raised in the 1970s, taught that I was supposed to believe everything that you read in the newspaper, and if you see it on TV, then it's got to be true, as if somebody was out there vetting everything. And one of the issues that I had with that was that I fell for a lot of these pseudoscience documentaries that they used to air, that some of them they did just for entertainment purposes only. And I was not aware of that as a little boy watching what I thought was science. So I'm seeing all of this scientific evidence for psychic powers, for telekinesis, for Kirlian photography of life force, and all of these other things, spectral manifestations, astral projections, ghost sightings, ectoplasm, and all of this. So I'm following all of these pseudosciences, not realizing that that's what they are. And because I was interested in the paranormal and the unexplained and all of this, I looked into it more and more, expecting that I was going to find that it was real. I mean, everybody seems to believe that we all have a soul, and that that the powers that they use in Star Trek or Star Wars, that somebody actually has those things. You know, that telepathy is possible. Everybody seems to think of this, and it was a disturbing thing to find that, every one of these things that I investigated, one by one, they all collapsed. It turned out that there was no truth to any of them. And, people don't say that, anything is possible, and that, I haven't ruled out any possibility. Well, if you haven't shown me that there is a possibility, it's not that I have to prove it wrong. You have to show me that there is some truth to it. And that's where my philosophy came. This is why I'm speaking at skeptics conferences and that sort of thing most often. A summary then on the perspective of faith is that faith is essentially wanting to believe whatever you want to believe simply because you want to believe it. And one of the ways that I define that, I know Peter Boghossian latched onto something that I said years ago. He said that faith is pretending to know what you really don't know, and really what no one even can know. But for me, it is it's an assertion of a unreasonable position that is assumed without reason and defended against all reason. Because if you look at the statement of faith for different apologetics or creationist websites and colleges or ministries, whatever they call them, their statement of faith always says that they're going to hold this conclusion as priori over anything, and that they will not, they'll paraphrase how they say this, but that they will not reject, or that they will not consider any evidence to the contrary. So by asserting that which, asserting as fact that which is not evidently true, this is already dishonest, but then also making a statement in the statement of faith that you will never allow any amount of proof to prove you wrong this is what makes faith the most dishonest position it is possible to have.
Great. Do you want to open up at that point for a Q&A?
Sure.
Okay, folks, if you would like to engage with Aron on anything that he said or any of his views on religion, atheism, faith, then you're welcome to raise your hand and engage with him with live microphone and audio. We have currently one hand raised from our friend Blake, also in Texas. Let me promote him to panelist to talk to Aron. Blake, you are live with Aron Ra. Do you want to go ahead?
Hey, Aron, man, how's it going?
It's all right.
I don't know if you remember me, but we were on Dogma Debate a number of weeks ago. I guess it was maybe over a year ago. But do you remember me at all?
It's been over a couple of years since I was on it.
Yeah, okay, then that makes sense. Well, cool, man. It's good to see you. Yeah, I'm here in Texas as well. So,
where are you at?
Murphy. I don't know. Do you know where Murphy is?
Yeah. Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a number of thoughts, but I'm going to just give one and then I'll open the floor up and then I'll come back with another. But the first one was this. It does seem like there's a big problem with individuals who go in, with their mind already made up and they're not going to consider any alternatives. They've closed their mind. Truth seeking is something that they are not serious about. And that's a vice. That's the opposite of a virtue. It's not a good thing. What I'm not sure about is the language of dishonesty, because when I think of dishonesty, I think of someone maliciously lying in some sense. So I guess what I wanted to ask is, although it definitely is a bad thing, is dishonesty the right word and why?
Okay. Let's say that you go to a school and you approach the principal and you tell them that there's a man outside in one of the cars waiting to pick up the kids. Mm-hmm. One of those cars has a man with a gun. Mm-hmm. And the response is that, of course, the principal's going to call the police are going to come out and they're going to ask you which car is it where there's the man with a gun. And then you say, well, you have to prove that there isn't one. So now we're in Texas. The probability is bunches of those cars have somebody sitting there with a gun, and it's not even a problem. But if you've made that statement, you tell the principal, you tell the police, there's a man out there with a gun, and you haven't actually seen it for your own eyes. You don't actually know which car it is. This is considered fraud. You've perpetuated a hoax. Now, it doesn't matter that 6 people out there have guns. You didn't know which one it was. So you made an assertion of fact that was not evidently true. This is dishonest.
So, but suppose someone genuinely believed that there is a man there with a gun. He's deluded. Okay, obviously he believed it for no good reason. You can explain it by a delusion. I don't know why he would believe it, but the idea is if he genuinely believes it, and then he goes and says there's a man out there with a gun, in my mind, he wouldn't be lying. There's something wrong going on, but I wouldn't call him dishonest. I don't know if that's the right term. So that's kind of what I'm bringing
up. Do we
up.
accept that when a sane man asserts as fact that which is not evidently true, do we accept that that is dishonest?
If he doesn't believe what he's saying, when I think of the word dishonesty, I think of someone who's lying.
Okay, if you believe something,
yeah,
you're supposed to have a reason why you believe it, right? I mean,
I think that's
seen the man with a gun. You saw the guy. You saw that he had a gun. Okay. So maybe you saw something that wasn't. You made an honest mistake, right? You thought you had evidence. You thought you had a reason to believe that. But if you don't have a reason to believe that, you just said it because you believe it. You want to make believe that he probably has a gun because he looks like one of those people that would have a gun. So I just assumed he had. No. That's still fraud. That's still dishonest. So and when you mentioned the delusion thing, that's not really an out either, because religion falls into the category of delusion, according to the National Academy of Medical or what was it? I can't remember the organization. But anyway, this is a psychiatric organization. They give the definition of delusion as being a persistent false belief that will not change when the subject is given evidence to the contrary. In other words, it's a delusion because the belief remains fixed even after the subject has shown evidence to prove it wrong. To falsely claim something that is, when there is evidence otherwise, or to refuse to accept evidence to the contrary, in either case. And of course, religion falls into that category. So it is a delusion. And as a matter of fact, the same organization that gives this definition says that psychosis is a loss of contact with reality, but they make a provision that the loss of contact with reality can't simply be a religion. So they recognize religion as being a loss of contact with reality. They just put it in a separate category from psychosis, both of which being delusions, by the way.
Right. I mean, obviously, I'm in the camp that thinks that there is reason to believe in, that God exists and that Jesus rose from the dead and so forth. Now,
well, that wasn't obvious.
Yeah. Okay.
See, I thought I had reasons for that too. Unfortunately.
Right, and I could be mistaken. But just to throw that out there, that's something to dive into in a bit. But going back to my sort of the question I wanted to launch with was.
Hold on one second before you do, because this is the first time I've ever been in this format.
Uh-huh.
I want to make sure there's not other. I don't know how this works. There's not other hands raised right now, right? I mean, nobody has any objection to us continuing this conversation.
There is currently one hand raised, but Blake can continue for a little bit.
Okay, good. Yeah. Just let me know if we need to break off.
Yeah, Jonathan, if we're going too long, find a good stopping point.
Yeah.
So when I think of the term dishonesty, that's sort of in the category of lying. A person is communicating a falsehood. Do you see it that way?
No, that there are multiple levels of it. Now, you can also be dishonest with yourself, actually trying to evoke a belief, and this is what religion encourages. It's like when I had my own conversion, when I was a reborn Christian, that whole day that I was a reborn Christian, I asked my best friend at that time, we were in high school, 19 years old. He is now a fundamentalist Baptist minister, but I asked him at that point, how do I know that this euphoria that I'm feeling is really real? That how do I know that it's really from Jesus and it's not an illusion or come from some other source? And he grabbed me by both shoulders and said, just keep telling yourself it's Jesus until you believe it.
Oh, no.
So he doesn't recognize that is dishonest, but it is. It's lying to yourself, and that's what it means.
Yeah, I can actually see that. So maybe that would be a good way of thinking of a delusion as well, as you're lying to yourself because you want to believe it, or there could be other reasons. But if
his ministry defended this
yourself,
his ministry defended this under the colloquialism, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Just keep telling yourself that it's true until you believe that it's true. But, of course, that means lying to yourself. Of course, they can't be honest about that because there's no truth to religion. There's not one thing that anybody can say that is true. They say it anyway.
Yeah. I'll make one more comment and then I'll pass it on to the other person. Okay. So, and that's the most charitable way I can think of interpreting what you're saying is blind faith is lying, but more lying to yourself. Because in my mind, there are people out there who believe things not on the basis of evidence. It's a bias, or it's like you said, they just look at a person. He just looks like, he's guilty of something.
Yeah.
I
was told when I was a little boy that there was no such that your first impression was accurate, because despite whatever biases or despite whatever misinformation you could have, they're not taking that into account. They think that you're divining your first impression. Yeah. This is the way I was raised. These are the kinds of information that people were giving me, and I had to work my way out of that.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I guess in my mind, that's the most charitable way that I can think of it is you're being dishonest with yourself usually if you're believing something without evidence. But what I would like to think about is in terms of critiquing blind faith, I wonder if there's a more precise way of picking out what the bad thing about blind faith is, because at least in the language that I normally use, if someone is tricking themselves, or if someone believes something for no reason or for really bad reasons, and then they communicate that to another person, I don't feel like they're lying to that other person as long as they genuinely believe it. And if I don't think that they're lying, I don't think that they're technically being dishonest.
Well, they clearly don't understand critical thinking either. I mean,
I agree with that. So
see, the way I see it, the only value information has is how accurate you can show it to be. And if you can't show that the information is accurate at all, then it has no value at all.
I'm very sympathetic with something along those lines. So cool. That was it. Thank you. Okay. I'll come back with more to say later.
Please. Is it Gunter? I can't hear you, sir.
I'm sorry, I was muted there. Sorry, we have Dr. Günther Betschley also with us as a paleontologist over in Germany. Hello, Günther.
We're still, his mic is still muted.
Yeah, his mic is still muted. Sorry. Hey, Gunter.
I have to unmute where?
No,
You're good now. We can hear you.
Okay, great. So, hello, Aaron. How are you doing?
How do you do? You say you're a paleontologist in Germany?
Right, and I read that you study paleontology in Dallas, so we have a lot of fossils in common.
Outstanding.
Right. So, about the topic, about the issue, you said that you define faith as somebody who wants to believe, who basically makes something up. And I would sympathize with saying that this is not a proper way to approach any topic. You said it's pretending to know something which you basically realize that you don't know it. And
I don't know if people realize it or not, but they confuse their conviction with knowledge. And there's a difference.
Right.
You know, the difference with knowledge and mere belief is that knowledge is testable. You know, you can show what you know. If I say that, if I give you information and there's no way I can verify it. If I can't validate my claims to any degree at all by any means whatsoever, it doesn't matter how convinced I am.
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
There's no way that I could confirm even for myself that I really know that.
Right. Absolutely no disagreement here. So also the other points, I think you said it's against reason and not considering any contradictory evidence. I have the suspicion that most people, at least in this session, who are Christians, will sympathize and will agree with saying that this kind of faith would be an improper faith. So would you consider that your statement that faith is dishonest would only apply to a subset of believers of any religion who fit this definition, which in Christianity maybe would be this branch, which is called fideism, which basically agrees with your definition and says faith is against reason or contradicts reason. But there's a large part of Christianity which subscribes to evidentialism. Also, if you look at the scriptural basis of Christianity, 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer to anybody who questions you for the hope that you have.
But at the same time,
there are Christians who would agree that you need evidence and that Christianity is an evidence-based faith. Would you restrict your claim that faith is dishonest to, let's say, fideists, or would you extend it also to people who would say, we at least honestly think that we have proper evidential reasons to believe what we believe, that we have proper philosophical arguments to support this belief? Or would you generalize this claim that any kind of religious faith is dishonest?
Every kind of religious faith is dishonest.
Okay.
Flat out. There's not an exception. There's not different degrees of it. There's always believing things because you want to, or asserting belief, asserting knowledge of things that you really only believe, and not having the evidence to back it up. That's the only definition of what faith I'm aware of. Now, the type of Christian that I was that I didn't know that I had to believe, that I had to make myself believe. I believed what I believed because my parents and my babysitters and my aunts and uncles and everybody told me that God is a conclusively proven scientific fact, and that there's all this proof to prove God. And I didn't even know that you could question the existence of God until I was about 14. Questioning whether there is a God is like questioning whether there is really a president of the United States, or is it just a scam to make us all think that there's really a shadow government and they just imagine that there's a president, but there's not really a president. This is just a lie that they set out on the media. Something that crazy. So this is the way I was raised. It was crazy to question whether there was a God. May as well question whether your parents are really your parents.
Okay.
So I didn't know what faith meant, oddly enough, until after I got out of Christianity, which, by the way, when my friend told me to keep telling myself it's Jesus until you believe it, that was my last instant as a Christian. Because he basically, he gave me the information that his belief is based on a lie, which meant the whole Christianity was based on a lie.
Okay.
And it may as well be if you can't find any truth to it. Anytime you're going to say that something, if you believe something, okay, fine. Why do you believe that? Okay, we don't have a reason why you believe that. Okay, we're done. But if you're going to state that something is, well, then you have to show me how you know that. And if you can't, then you don't know that. And so this is all that Christianity is for me. I mean, so yeah, you say that you have to always be prepared to give an answer, but don't cast your pearls before swine and so forth. There's always an out. There's always, like Matt Slick gave me this one quote about the doubting Thomas, right? How Thomas needed evidence, and that's what kind of faith he's talking about, ignoring the very next line that said, blessed is he who has not seen and yet believe. That's what the real definition is,
right?
Not the line before.
But if you take this part of scripture, but probably Jonathan can explain this much better, this is very much focused on the fact that it was at the time of the apostles, and the apostles had the possibility to verify. They knew what they saw. And this addresses basically the problem that later generations will not have this possibility. But I don't want to delve in biblical issues. I would like to ask you, what would you say to somebody like me who's coming from totally opposite direction? I had the opposite experience from you. I was an atheist till my 40s, totally, never went to church, was not baptized. Always thought that atheism is beyond question, that religious belief is completely medieval or Iron Age superstitious bullshit. And because of philosophical arguments and because of evidential arguments, I became convinced that I was wrong, and I'm now a theist and a Christian. So what would be your argument to claim that my faith, which I, of course, would define in a totally different way, and I think most Christians would not agree with your definition of faith. What would be your argument to say that my faith is dishonest if I tell you that it is based on a honest, truth-seeking experience on evaluating evidence, evaluating philosophical arguments, coming to the conclusion that atheism and materialism is basically inconsistent and incoherent? So what would you say to somebody like me?
All right. The first time that I encountered somebody that said that the evidence compelled him to become Christian, it turned out that he was always Christian his entire life and had realized that he couldn't maintain a belief in old earth because it would contradict the Bible.
Right.
That was the evidence that he was talking about. So right. No, that just dismissed that. We had an atheist activist who was popular on YouTube for a bit, and then she converted to Christianity, which was very confusing to us. And I understand that when you walk away from religious belief, you're ostracized, you're bastardized, you're scrutinized, but nobody ever asks you why, which is completely the opposite. When you are non-religious and then you adopt a religion, people were going to, what changed your mind? So I asked her, and I had to grill this woman on Dogma Debate for about 2 hours before I finally got what the real answer was. The evidence that she kept alluding to was that she encountered a Christian group in school and they were hot. That was her reason for converting to Christianity. Had nothing at all to do with evidence. So if you have evidence, the best you could come up with, I think, is the kind of thing that I held on to forever. The thing about what it was for me, and this is going to be a different key for everybody. It's the Curlian photography thing. There was in an old episode of In Search Of that I didn't know was made for entertainment purposes. They take a photograph of a leaf on photoelectric plates to show the electrical field, and you see that leaf, all the veins in the leaf and everything laid out in phosphorescent blue sparks. Then they cut the leaf in half and they take a picture again, and of course, the first you only see the half leaf you're supposed to see, and then on an overexposure they show the whole leaf. And this proved to me, scientific evidence of life force. Now, I didn't know that they'd made it all up. I based my entire belief system forever on scientific evidence that turned out to be fraudulent. That could be the case with you. There was supposedly a famous atheist philosopher, I can't remember his name right now, but
Anthony Flew.
Anthony Flew, yes. And he read one of those unscrupulous intelligent design books and actually bought their nonsense, which is really disturbing. So, you have bogus arguments and bogus evidence, and I'm interested to hear what is yours. You're gonna show me that you have evidence that there's a magical anthropomorphic immortal who somehow manipulates everyday actions.
I would already disagree. I would say the concept of God that you were just presenting would be heretical in my view. Anthropomorphic immortal. So if you would ask for the evidence that convinced me, that would be probably a different
Okay, then what is a God?
I'm not sure if I'm welcome to
Then
start.
let's make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Just to give some catchwords,
Okay.
the first thing that got me doubting was questioning philosophy of mind. Is there any possibility for a coherent explanation of consciousness, of qualia, of the hard problem of consciousness? The second thing was from philosophy of time. Is there a true becoming? Do we live in a block universe? What does this have for implication? And then you start to look for philosophical arguments. And I would say there are philosophical arguments, let's say the 5 ways of Aquinas, that support the existence of a transcendent, outside of space and time being. That is the ultimate explanation for the existence of anything except instead of nothing. And then there is historical evidence.
Okay, wait, I don't want to get to an "and then" when I didn't even accept the premise. Okay, you say there are philosophical arguments. I've heard them. They're not. Okay, the first one that you mentioned was, I'm sorry, you said, is it possible, or is there an explanation for consciousness that doesn't evolve? Of course, yes, obviously, easily. So
no, give it.
Let's not that premise. Let's go to the evidence. Okay, so I mean the philosophy thing, been there, done that. Erroneous arguments, they don't work. Let's go to the evidence. What is the evidence? And first, since we're obviously talking about two different things here, I mean, are we talking about Einstein and Spinoza's God, which is not really a God at all, but the laws of the cosmos, or are we talking about an actual God, something that worshippers of a God would recognize as a God?
Now, I think here we may already have the problem. I wouldn't deny that a large percentage of Christians have a misconceived image of deity or of theism. And even I'm a Catholic, and even most Catholics don't know what they should believe if they really believe what what the Catholic Church teaches. So I think you have to distinguish, let's say, what average John Doe believer would tell you and what so-called sophisticated theologians or philosophers of religion would tell you how would be a philosophically coherent concept of God.
Okay, if I'm going to tell you
a kind of Thor or Zeus-like deity, I would say there are philosophical arguments for a deity which is very different from any kind of
ignoring the philosophical arguments, because that's never going to fly. What is a deity?
A deity, I think, would be already the wrong word. I'm not making a case for a deity. I would make a case for there has
to believe in a deity,
existent, transcending explanation for the fact that anything exists instead of nothing.
Okay, let's start with this then. Do you believe in a deity?
I believe in a deity, but
what is a deity?
Wait a moment, but my deity wouldn't be a species of a genus, not in the zoological sense, in the philosophical sense, would not be a species of the genus deity, which includes deities like the Egyptian polytheistic deity or the flying spider.
Are you saying that the word God has no definition?
I would say
may as well not.
God is ambiguous, and
so we can't even
logical.
If we can't even define what we're talking about, then how do we know if there's even a there?
I think every Christian can give you a definition.
No, talk to a whole lot of Christians.
Okay, not everyone. But sophisticated Christians.
To give you an example, you mentioned Catholics earlier. The first time I had a conversation with a Catholic about religion, the first answer was, I said, "So you're Catholic? Does that mean that you think that everything that the Pope says is infallible?" Her answer was, "What's a Pope?"
Okay.
The second person that I talked to about Catholicism, I said, if there was any event in history that you could change, what would that event be? And she said, when Eve fucked the serpent.
But that is not an argument. Look, you always should attack. Would you agree that it is a proper method in debating any issue to take the most charitable position of the...
Certainly. So if
let's say, idiots who don't know what they talk about and use circumstantial evidence or anecdotal evidence of some people you met who had a confused...
I'm just giving examples for exceptions. You said every Christian, clearly not every...
Right. That was
okay. So when I tell you that there's someone in the bathroom, right? I can show you that there's someone in the bathroom. I'll tell you there's a man outside with a gun. I can give you the reason why I think there's a man outside with a gun. So we both know what a man is. We both know what a gun is. We both know what the bathroom is. So before we can talk about whether there is or is not a God, the first thing we need to determine is what a God is.
Okay, but I gave you my definition. A necessarily existing, transcendent being, with will, with consciousness, which exists outside of space and time.
Does this? There's no physical form here?
No.
So there's a mind existing without a brain.
Right.
So an impossible thing is impossible not to exist. It's impossible to exist, but you're saying it's impossible not to.
You're asserting, you're in a way...
Is it possible to have a mind without a brain to generate?
Yes, of course.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
In order to say that something is possible, you have to show a precedent or parallel or at least some confirmed phenomenon to verify that that possibility exists. What can you show me that demonstrates the possibility that a mind can exist without a brain?
Yes, I can, and that is actually quite easy. The possibility. Yeah, you wouldn't require a definite, because even in science there's no definite proof.
But there is precedent or parallel or confirmed or verified phenomenon.
It is easy to prove that the possibility exists. Look.
Okay, do it.
You know that there's a logical law of identity. So if two things are identical, they have to have exactly the same properties, right? So if A is equals B, B has to have all properties that A has. Let's say the person who's speaking to you right now and Günter Bechley are the same person, and both have the same properties, the same height, the same weight, the same name, and so on.
Okay.
All right. So
are we going to stay with philosophical arguments? Because I tell you now, and I'll tell you again,
but
those will never work on me. I need evidence. I've already been round and round with the philosophy. Sorry, no. Assuming that an impossible thing is impossible not to exist.
Okay, wait a moment.
It exists.
Wait a moment. You're saying you do not allow philosophical arguments, only, let's say...
I'm telling you that I'm not going to be compelled. I'm not going to be compelled in this, because we're talking about something real here.
Okay, but how do you know that this principle is correct?
If you want to talk philosophy, the best you can do is a mind game or word game to try to make things seem like you can pretend that it's real. But I want evidence that it actually is real. So we have to show that there is a possibility.
I would do that. Please give me first the evidence that this principle that you now use, that only this kind of evidence can prove anything or can establish.
What do you mean this kind of evidence? I'll take anything that qualifies as evidence. Any body of facts which are objectively verifiable and positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with that one conclusion over any other consistently and without contradictions. Do you have anything that qualifies as evidence?
You misunderstood me. You rejected philosophical arguments, said stop.
Right. Philosophical arguments are by definition not evidence.
What is your evidence that that only non-philosophical arguments could establish, let's say, the possibility of non-material minds?
I gave you the definition of evidence. I asked you for evidence. You said you had evidence. You understand that philosophical arguments are by definition not evidence.
Look, you asked for the possibility. You didn't ask for proof.
So we need then, in order to have a possibility, as I expressed, you have to show precedent or parallel or at least a verified phenomena to confirm that such possibility exists. Do you have that?
But you can establish possibility with a philosophical argument if you don't accept the philosophical argument.
We're talking about something, whether it's real or not. You said there was evidence. Are you going to retract that statement, or are you going to present that evidence?
There is philosophical evidence.
There is no such thing as philosophical evidence.
Of course there is.
Philosophical arguments.
Is there evidence that 2 + 2 is 4?
Okay, that's not philosophy.
That is a part of logic, and mathematics is
that may be a part of logic, yes, but it's not philosophy. A philosophical argument is just a philosophical argument. If you're saying evidence, when you tell me that you have evidence, you're telling me that you have a body of objectively verifiable facts which are positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with that one conclusion over any other consistently and without contradictions. Do you have evidence, or do you not?
this kind of what you're trying to establish is
So you're telling me that you do not have evidence.
Which is
Would you accept that the definition that I've given you for evidence is correct? Do you accept that that definition is correct?
No.
Look it up.
Actually, no. Because
shall we look it up?
There are a lot of
Shall we look it up together? Shall we look it up together?
Look, you can look up a lot of terms in English dictionaries. And
okay, so you're just going to dismiss the definition wholesale, even though you know that it's right. Is that what I'm hearing?
Look, if you take a argument like a modus ponens or a modus tollens argument,
okay.
If you accept the premises, then you get a conclusion, and this is evident philosophical evidence. It is not empirical. There's a reason why empirical evidence is called empirical evidence.
Right, yeah. Empirical evidence is empirical evidence, and philosophical arguments are not empirical evidence. They're not any kind.
No, but they are evidence.
They're not evidence because they don't fit the definition of evidence. Please look up the definition of evidence and then tell me, do you have it or do you not?
I think what you're referring to is empirical evidence, but I let me stand corrected. But if you have an English dictionary which defines it different, but anyway, what are you
understand it when I say evidence? This is
but what are you really interested in? Are you interested in truth or are you interested in
absolutely, absolutely yes. I am interested in truth, so much so that if there was really a God, I would want you to show me the evidence. And if there was really a God, there would be evidence. And if there was really a God and you cared about truth, you would present me without evidence, and it wouldn't involve any philosophical word games.
What you did before is you made a statement and you said it's impossible that non-material minds can exist. And you asked me for evidence that this is not true.
Right.
Your statement was a philosophical statement, and therefore
it's a philosophical statement. In order to show that there is a possibility, you have to show that there's a precedent or parallel or confirmed phenomenon to verify that such possibility exists.
No. You made a claim.
How do you think you verify a possibility exists?
Look, let's stay at the exactly at the example which we are arguing. You made a statement and said it's impossible that immaterial minds exist.
Right, and for obvious reasons, right?
Philosophical statement.
How is it a philosophical statement? Can you show me a mind? Show me a mind that exists independent of any brain.
Because it is a statement that basically subscribes to materialism, and that is a metaphysical viewpoint and not an empirical viewpoint.
If we're interested in truth,
you are asking for a reputation of materialism.
Are we interested in truth? Because I have to tell you, the way I define truth is what. You know, understand it. The dictionary will say that truth is that which is concordant with reality, right?
That is one of the definitions of truth, which I would also subscribe to.
So we understand that reality itself is not truth because it has to be concordant with reality. That means that reality is not truth. It's statements about reality that can be truth if they're true. So as I understand it, truth is whatever statement about reality that we can show to be true. Can you show that it is concordant with reality? The truth is what the facts are. So if you want me to believe that what you've got is the truth, then show me the facts. Show me the truth of it.
But apparently you don't want to hear the argument. It is easy to show.
Are you telling me that you do not have any evidence at all, and all you have are philosophical arguments that make assumptions that I'm not ready to make?
That was not my claim. We're talking about this specific problem of the question: can there be immaterial minds? And there I have.
Show me that there can. First, show me that there can be such a thing as an immaterial mind, and then show me that it can be generated without a brain.
I can show you, but I think this is a futile endeavor. I can show you that.
Why do you think it would be a futile endeavor? If I'm looking for truth, I want to know what is true. Can you show me something that you can show to be true? This is the problem I have.
Listen to the argument.
This is the problem that I have with religion. They will not show me anything that's true because they can't.
But we are not talking about showing that a stone is on the table, or we are talking about you made a claim.
Are you telling me there's a stone on the table?
You made a metaphysical claim, Aron.
Except I didn't. I did not.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't. I said, if you're going to show me that a possibility exists, you're going to show me that a possibility exists.
No. You said an immaterial mind is an impossible thing, and that is a metaphysical claim.
You do not agree. I realize you do not agree that a mind requires a brain to generate. I mean, that's what definition of a mind is. It is the information that is generated by a brain. That's the definition. So you're going to show me a mind that hasn't been generated by a brain. So you're going to show me a mind that defies the definition of what a mind is to support a God that defies the definition of what a God is.
It's possible. To show that it's possible is only necessary to show that the definition of mind is not one-to-one corresponding to the definition of a brain.
Right. Are we going to argue definitions all day? Are we going to argue definitions all day? I would say that a mind is the information, the knowledge, the personality, if you will, if you want to include that is generated by a brain. Now, you're going to show me a mind that defies the definition.
But that is a metaphysical statement.
What? How? How is it
material? You deny that, for example, qualia exists. There is no color red. There is not really pain. There are only.
Why do you imagine that I'm denying things that I'm not denying?
Because you have to. If you want to be consistent and you want to claim that the brain is the mind, that is what you would say. The brain is the mind.
You understand that a mind is defined as the information generated by a brain. You understand that, right?
The mind is not the information.
Okay, what do you think a mind is?
If you want to have information, you require a mind, because only a mind makes some signs into information.
Shall we? I think we're going to.
Is presupposing mind. It is not equal to mind.
This is an amusing thing. Whenever I get into conversations with Christians, it involves dictionaries from the beginning to the end. And the dictionaries always lie, because the definition of truth you throw out. The definition of evidence you throw out. The definition of God is meaningless.
But show me one dictionary which makes a consistent case that the mind is information. I think you will not find any dictionary in the world which says the mind is information, finish, and nothing else. That is completely nonsense. I'm sorry.
The element, part, substance, or process that reason thinks, feels, wills, perceives, judges, etc.
But will is not information. Perceive is not information.
All of the things I just listed, jumbled together, are in the category of information.
No, they aren't.
Guys, Blake's wanting to jump in at this point, so let me just go back to Blake for a little bit. Blake, do you want to go ahead?
I did have a hand raised. It wasn't necessarily on this, although I have 1,000 thoughts that I'd like to share in all of this.
Can you first tell me what a God is?
I think God is the greatest possible being. So that would be.
That could be anybody on earth. Can we be a little bit more precise? Because I understand.
Hold on, Aron. You asked me a question. Let me just say something real quick. So I could spend time teasing that out and why I think the greatest possible being is going to be someone that's omniscient and omnipotent and so forth. But that's a bit different.
He would have to show that such a thing is even possible. And he doesn't understand how to show that something is possible.
Okay, so that's a great conversation. Maybe we'll come back to it. I want to pull back to the topic of biblical faith. I know that's like very different. This is kind of an interesting conversation. Maybe we'll come back to it, but just to sort of make some headway on where we were.
I just want to interject one thing before you go, because I don't want to be barking up the wrong tree or wasting time.
Sure.
Whether a God exists or not, the Bible is man-made mythology and evolution is still a fact. Either way.
I don't agree, but okay.
Okay. Well, I can show you that evolution is true. I can prove it to your satisfaction. Okay. I can also show you that the Bible has been disproven on every testable claim that it makes. So regardless, whether a God exists or not, the Bible is still false. Evolution is still real.
Okay.
So your God argument should be independent of the Bible.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. So going back to, this is the second thing I wanted to bring up when you gave your presentation on faith, that it's essentially believing something that you know deep down inside isn't really true, which kind of fits with Mark Twain's old definition. You know, faith is believing what you know ain't so. And you mentioned Peter Boghossian in particular, who he wrote that, you know, I'll now offer my preferred definition of faith. It's pretending, you know, to know what you don't know. Did you know that there was actually a famous radio face-off between Boghossian and Tim McGrew, who is he's a professor at Western Michigan University, and he's a prominent epistemologist, which is a philosopher of knowledge. Did you get a chance to listen to that, or have you heard about it?
No, I haven't. I just want to interject something that I saw in the notes, something typed up. If If there was physical evidence to prove God, people still won't believe. Wrong. The problem is sin blinding people. Wrong. It is only through the power of the Holy Spirit. Have to believe in order, and this simultaneously is an admission that there is not evidence, which of course proves that I'm using the right definition. Thank you, Stephen Tilley, for making my argument for me. Go ahead.
Okay, so just going back to this big radio face.
I'm sorry. Somebody else asked if a computer has no brain, how does it have a mind? A computer is a brain. It is essentially the same thing. The mind is generated by the computer brain. Not a difficult concept. Sorry, I shouldn't look at the sidebar.
Is there any, if you want to respond to, that's a good point. They asked their questions first, so you can look through the panel real quick and see if there's anything you want to respond to, and then I'll go after them.
Okay. I don't want to. They're not terribly relevant, so we'll go ahead.
Okay. So I understand that there are two questions coming up here. One is belief in God and these things that go into the faith category, is it actually rational? And then there's the question of what is the meaning of faith? When people use the word faith, what do they actually mean? And I think that it's this second one that we're really wanting to focus in on for our topic today.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that Stephen Tilley is interrupting again. He doesn't realize that if you have a supernatural entity who controls or alters events in the natural world, then that is, of course, going to leave evidence of the supernatural thing. God may be a supernatural being, but when he reaches into his hand to the physical plane, he's going to pull his arm out dripping with physics. He's going to leave evidence of his existence. Miracles can be evidence if, in fact, they were real. But since we can never verify any kind of a miracle, there's no such thing that is reproducible by any means, we again have nothing to go on. Thank you, Stephen Tilley. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, you're fine. I understand sometimes someone says something, you just can't hold it.
And it's just so outrageous. I mean, yeah, obviously I put computer in the same category as a biochemical brain. I mean, you can simulate the effect either way. So go ahead. So
I mentioned that you have these two people. You have Peter Boghossian, who's an atheist who has a book out, the Manual for Creating Atheists, and he has his definition of faith, which is, believing something ain't true. And I mentioned that there was this famous radio face-off with him and Timothy McGrew, because a lot of people were really, a lot of believers were really not liking Boghossian's definition of faith.
I can understand that, yeah.
Yeah, and so what McGrew insisted that even if Boghossian felt that Christians had poor reason for their belief, such that their belief is irrational, it should not imply that they mean blind faith when they use the word faith.
Well, what do you say they mean? Because when I read through, I've read the words of theologians past and present. And I've read the words of converted priests who admitted that faith was always, for their belief system, was believing something that had no evidence behind it. Martin Luther said the same thing. You've got the hymns of Michael Card say the same thing. So every source I go to, at some point confesses, just as Stephen Tilley's posted a little bit ago, that there is no physical evidence. And then I get admissions that, these may be what the facts are, but I prefer to believe this. And then we have that other guy, John Christie, who made the movie My Week in Atheism. He admitted to his own congregation that he is delusional. Because
Hey, Aron, that's circumstantial evidence. So what I'm about to do is...
All right, so... I'm just saying that all of the sources...
Can I present? Sorry, I know you've got a lot to say. I'll be very quick, and then I'll let you respond as long as you want. So what I wanted to say is, in this face-off, at the end of their discussion, McGrew actually proposed doing a poll on what the meaning of what people meant when they used the word faith. And so the choice, they made a very specific choice in the wording of the question, and it was very strategic because if the Christian disagreed with Boghossian's definition, then that would be sufficient to establish that Boghossian was wrong about what Christians mean. But they actually decided to also ask a similar question. They wanted non-believers to participate as well. And if the non-Christian agreed with Boghossian's definition, what it would go on to show is that non-believers at large were also accidentally perpetuating a myth about what Christians mean.
Okay,
let me tell you the results of the poll. Okay, here was the question that they asked.
Okay,
do you agree that when Christians use the word faith, they mean, quote, believing something even though it's not supported by evidence, end quote. Now, on your hypothesis, most Christians, that's what they mean by the word. So you should expect most
I mean all of them.
Yeah, okay, you would expect all of them to.
You yourself mean that.
Okay, but here's the results of the poll. The question again is, do you agree that when Christians use the word faith, they mean believing something even though it's not supported by evidence?
Right.
On the Christian poll, only 9% said that's what they mean.
Right.
91% said that's not what I mean by the word faith.
Because many of them.
Hold on, Aron, one more sentence. Okay. Here's that second poll. The non-Christians, 72% said that that's what Christians mean. And so it also shows that there's a big misunderstanding about what believers actually mean when they use the word.
Right, okay, because they confuse philosophical arguments with evidence, for example. So if you're talking about that, you're going to tell me that my definition of faith is wrong, and this is the first part of every conversation with Christians. They're going to tell me that I have faith, that science requires faith, that religion is based on evidence. They're going to try to create that false equivalency of equal ground. I don't have faith. I reject all beliefs based on faith. Any belief that requires faith should be rejected for that reason. Evidence is the only reason anyone should believe anything, not philosophical arguments, evidence. And I gave the definition for what evidence is. Thinking as a scientist, I'm going to give you a scientific definition of evidence. Do you or any of the Christians typing in the panel have evidence that there's a God?
I think I have evidence, absolutely.
Great. Now, you're going to win a Nobel Prize when you present it and actually shows as evidence. One moment, I want to address something in the post. Somebody in there typed that evolution was not factual. Yes, of course it is. I will prove it to you if you want to join me in a public forum, not real-time talking, because we have to show evidence. So I have to be able I have to give links and illustrations and diagrams and things like that. So it may be necessary. So this will be a written conversation. It'll be just a couple dozen mutual exchanges at most. But yes, that'll be sufficient. The only criteria is you can't dodge questions. Every Christian I've tried to explain this to, with single exception, all of them dodge questions repeatedly. They don't answer anything because they need the goalposts to be moving. But if you will answer questions and not repeatedly ignore them, then I will prove evolution to your satisfaction. But it's an interactive process. I have to do it by asking you questions to get you engaged, to get you to understand, and then move on, building on that understanding. Okay, I just wanted to address that because it's the most annoying falsehood I ever seen. Evolution's not a fact. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Just like atoms, atomic theory. That doesn't mean that atoms are only theory. That we can prove it.
Okay. So I mean that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to bring your attention to that poll because it does establish that at least in terms of Christians saying what they mean, they don't mean that understanding. So. How do you reconcile your belief that that's what they mean with them coming back and saying, no, I mean, it's a big poll. That's not what we mean by faith.
Right, because the argument that people give is their conviction. But one of the evidences that Ray Comfort brought up was the radical nature of conversion and how the 10 Commandments are pulling on your heart. This is not evidence. I gave the definition before. Objectively verifiable facts that are positively indicative of, or a set of conditions, a set of facts that are only concordant with that, and wouldn't be the case for something else.
Hey, Aron,
nobody shares this definition. I just looked at dictionary.com, and the definition of evidence is totally different. What you tried that is
dictionary.com.
Hey guys, there's different definitions of evidence, especially.
No, there shouldn't be any significant degree of variance. Let me take a look. Now, I gave the most precise definition you're going to get, but there shouldn't be any significant degree of variance.
Guys, in epistemology, there's such a diverse understanding of what evidence is. So I'm a Bayesian, and so I'm going to say that
that which tends to prove or disprove something, ground for right. So I'm right. It's paraphrased, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, but that can be philosophical evidence. It doesn't say it's
okay. Can you prove it? Can you prove it that it physically exists? No, because you have to have objectively verifiable facts in order to prove something. The definition from dictionary.com matches mine. Mine is more precisely phrased, but they mean the same thing.
Hey, Günther, can I finish up real quick and then I'll turn it back to you? I'm going to be super quick. I'm just trying to finish this up. So I wanted to bring it back to the topic of what is meant by faith, and we can actually, I think, answer that question without getting into a discussion about what evidence is. I have my thoughts there. I'd love to share them, but I want to try to be as quick as possible here. because we're thinking about what do believers mean when they use the word faith. And I drew attention to this poll, which is the best way we can establish what believers mean when they use the word faith. There's no better way to assess what believers mean than a big, large poll like this. And sure enough, the results of the poll were that no, that's not, by and large, only 9% would agree with this definition of faith.
Do you remember when I said that every argument that I have with Christians starts with the definition of faith and arguing what the definition of faith is? As I said, Matt Slick tried his best to ignore the, blessed is he who has not seen and yet believed, and I went to the sentence before that as if the doubting Thomas was the one that was supposed to be praised in that story. There's always this argument that I don't understand what faith is. In my book, I've got extensive references to different theologians and to hymns and to sermons and to so forth, showing admissions from all these different people. What?
How do you address the poll? What do you say?
Okay, I told you that in every one of these arguments, the Christian always says they have evidence. It always turns out that the evidence wasn't anything that could qualify as evidence at all. It was a prior conviction.
Let's grant that. I'm gonna, for discussion's sake, Aron, I'm going to grant you
their evidence is they feel it in their heart. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that one. That's your evidence? So no. I've given what the scientific definition of evidence is. So did Gunter, although he's not aware of it. Can you show me that?
Okay, great. Let's, for argument's sake, I'm going to grant you that every one of their alleged evidences is really bad evidence. And if we grant that, the definition...
Not bad evidence.
Wait, Aron, I'm letting you talk.
At all.
Aron, I've been really good about letting you talk. Let me finish here.
I'm sorry. I just want to say there's not. If we're talking about history, then maybe we've got good or bad evidence in the context that historians use. But in this context, there's not good or bad evidence. There's just evidence or not. And if it's not the definition that I gave, it's not evidence.
In a court case, you can have evidence. You can have conflicting evidence, can't you?
I'll grant in a court case you can. Because they're going to present facts, and then you're going to have to dispute whether it is evidence.
Yeah, I think that I'm using evidence in that broader sense.
Okay.
In that sense, let's assume that Christians only have, or theists in general, only have bad evidence. Okay, I'm going to grant that to you. In fact, let's say that atheism is true, and so yeah, all theistic arguments and evidences are just bad. Even then, they can think that they have evidence. And so when they use the word faith, they can say, I believe what I believe, and I don't accept that I believe it without evidence. And that's their meaning. So
right.
The meaning they disagree with your meaning.
The people don't understand that they don't have evidence.
Let me give you one more sense.
Okay.
The conclusion is this, is they can, your definition of faith can be wrong even if you're right that they don't actually have evidence. Okay,
yeah, Stephen Tilley just proved my argument again. Faith is essence. Faith in essence is assurance, absolute certainty. Now remember that the definition that I think I already said here, and also that I have in my book, is an assertion of complete conviction. Right? This is the way the Bible defines it. I mean, Christians want to say that faith is just trust, but it's not. It's a complete trust that is not based on evidence. And Stephen Tilley just admitted that.
Okay, Blake is signing off for just now. We have two hands raised currently. Let me take those. I think Gunter wants to come back, but let me just take the two hands that are raised, and then Gunter can come back. We have Salvador, who's just about to join us in the panel. Here we are. Salvador.
Yes, this is Salvador Cordova.
Yeah,
Hi,
go ahead.
Am I coming across okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, gotcha.
Hi, Aron. I'm the one who typed that I don't believe in evolution. But before I say anything else, I wanted to say I think you're arguing your case very well, and I'm very, very sympathetic to almost everything you've said. I am a Christian, a creationist, but I did not like the treatment of just believe without any evidence. I really like the fact, skepticism should be a virtue. In many churches, it's treated like something that's despicable, and so I find that distasteful. And everything you've been asking and challenging people with, I've really appreciated. So I'm probably not like a lot of the Christians you may encounter. And I also agree with you. I didn't like arguing philosophical stuff as evidence. I don't get along well with philosophers. So, and I also watch the In Search of stuff a lot. So that tells you about how old I am.
Yeah, much older than I would have guessed.
Oh, God bless you, sir. I hope you're not offended by me saying that. So I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate, ironically, I hang around a lot of atheists. I do appreciate the critical thinking, and I think that's something that needs to be valued more. I don't see it a lot in my circles. So,
well, thank you very much indeed. If you want to do that conversation in writing that I talked about, that's great. If you don't want to do that, I would encourage you to get my book when it comes out in September.
I would very much like to do that. Whatever questions, I don't know how we could arrange it. If you Google my name, you'll see all the nasty things they say about me, so I'm relatively well known in creationist circles.
Okay. Well, me too.
So I just wanted to say, I really thank you for what you're doing.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Even though I'm a Christian, I really wish that the questions you raised would be more welcome in churches, because I think young people need to think for themselves and deal with the difficult things that you all raise. Now, just one little thing about my background. I was in the documentary credits of the movie Holy Rollers. They were a group of Christian gamblers who took the casinos for $3.5 million. So I have a slightly different epistemology than most people. Some of the most important questions in life, I don't think there can be very clear evidence. So in the gambling world, decisions are usually made with a lot of incomplete evidence. And also in the investment world, which I'm a part of, that's just kind of the norm. Where
incomplete evidence is the norm.
And so for me, my approach to faith is much like making a contractual decision where you really don't have all the facts that you'd like. I'm of the opinion we never have as many facts as we'd like for the most important decisions we make in life.
On that note, I've got to mention Stephen Tilley just said something else to prove me right again by saying that his belief is not without evidence, right? So he falls into that poll, right? So he's a Christian who says that he believes with evidence, right? His evidence is, you're going to love this, absolute certainty. Remember I told you that they confuse conviction with evidence, right? His evidence is absolute certainty based on God's role in history and the life and death and resurrection of Christ. In other words, he believes it because he believes it. And his evidence is that he's absolutely convinced of it because he read a fable about it. How could you dismiss that? Oh, wait, what evidence? Okay. Thank you, Stephen Tilley. You've just admitted you have no evidence at all.
Well, I wanted to say I sympathize with your frustration. I'm more of a very circumspect kind of guy, and I'm always full of doubts, and I think that's a good. It's always good to be questioning and skeptical. I wouldn't be making life critical decisions just without considering it, or just self-examination that I could be totally wrong. If someone came to me and just tried to sell me a deal and sign on the dotted line, I would hope someone would exercise skepticism in questioning whether the guy's right. So I have a lot of sympathy for what you're saying. I've arrived at a different conclusion, and so if you'd like to talk, how could I? Would you? Is there an email site that I could? Do you have a public website? And if I emailed you, would you?
Yeah. I will do my best to answer the emails. Just please understand that I get a lot of them. So,
okay. I expect you probably get 1,000 emails a day.
It's a little cumbersome. For the moment, for right now, do you accept the definition that I gave for evidence, and that Gunter found on dictionary.com?
I'm not really into definitions. I like.
Okay, I am.
Let me say this. I'm more sympathetic to what you're saying.
Okay.
That's all I could say. In general, I thought you were scoring. Even though I'm a Christian and I'd be on Gunter's side of the argument, I actually thought you were winning the debate. So I'm not gonna,
Well, thank you very much. If you find that you have something that I would recognize as evidence according to the definition that I gave here, please present it.
Well, I'll give you
either now or in email. I don't mean to.
This is as good a time as any.
Yeah.
A professor at my alma mater, Richard Henry, he's a physicist. He wrote a paper that was published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. It dealt with consciousness and mind, and he actually argued from his background in physics and quantum mechanics that the basis of reality is a spiritual non-material mind. Now that's controversial, and
how do you have a spiritual non-material mind enter into a physics paper?
Well, obviously, if it was, that's probably one of the top science journals. But
granted, but I don't understand how you could indicate a spiritual non-material mind.
There were experiments that he cited, like the Super Renninger experiment, the quantum delayed choice experiment by Wheeler.
Hold on. I'm going to note these down.
Oh, sure.
What?
If you probably will hear about it a little bit with Neil deGrasse Tyson. There was a conference recently on whether...
Convince him.
Well, he said that the universe could be a computer simulation. So...
okay, just throwing out all these different possibilities as counter arguments. Is this addressing a false dichotomy?
Well, it's hard to actually discuss this in the brief space of what.
Okay. But you're saying Neil deGrasse Tyson knew the study, he's read the study, and he was not convinced.
Let me just toss that out. I retract that. I would refer to Richard Henry's article in the journal Nature, which is.
Has it convinced any other atheist?
A few. Frank Tipler, who's also a physicist.
Frank Tipler was a atheist, and now he, because of this article, is he believes in God now.
He actually was the one who pioneered some of the stuff that is in.
So he wrote the article, so he's negated from that.
He is. Frank
he
Tipler
believed in God before he wrote this.
Okay, Richard Henry. I don't know what.
Give me the name of any atheist who changed their mind because of this study.
Not this study, but an atheist.
Okay, can you give me the name of any atheist who changed their mind according to any of the evidence that you want to present to me?
Frank Tipler.
Frank Tipler wrote the study, or was convinced by the study?
He was convinced by evidence prior to the study. He probably contributed ideas that were reflected in this 2005 paper. His article was in 1987.
The evidence that convinced him in 1987 is part of this study in physics.
Yes. He was a student of...
In 1987?
Yes.
And it didn't convince anybody else?
Oh, there probably been a few others. Now,
okay. What was the name of it?
The Cosmological Anthropic Principle.
Sorry, I thought we were talking about physics, not a debunked argument. No. I understand why we don't need to go any further with that. That one's done and dead. Except in the minds of somebody like William Lane Craig, yes. So I guess I don't need to read the Super Renninger study because that's what it's based on?
Well, if you were interested in seeing some of the arguments, that was a restatement of it in 2005. And
okay. William Lane Craig.
I would hardly consider Richard Henry having been debated.
I don't know who this person is, but I know William Lane Craig still trots out the same argument. It doesn't matter that it was refuted 20 years ago. He's still using it, and no one will stop him. He has the same pat thing every debate that he does.
Well, Richard Henry, he's the physics professor.
Okay, who's Richard Henry?
Henry Rowland Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Johns Hopkins University. Okay,
and why should I look him up?
He argued that the universe is mental and spiritual, based on...
And he did this in a physics paper.
Yes, I can give you.
Is that the Super Renninger study that you told me to read before?
Do you see the chat line? I'll give you. It's in Nature 2005.
Okay. What's the name of Nature 2005? What's the name of the study?
Mental Universe, Nature, Volume 2436.
Okay.
Well,
I obviously will have to read that, and we will discuss that one later after
now,
I have.
And briefly regarding evolution, I know an atheist who became a Christian and then a creationist. He invented the gene gun. At one time, most of the genetically modified organisms on the planet were the result of his gene gun. His device is in the Smithsonian Museum of National Museum of American History. His name is John Sanford.
Okay.
So there are people that came from maybe
I'd be happy to. I would be happy to help him too.
Thank you.
Because I mean, as I said, this is something that I understand that most people don't understand this, and the best evidence for evolution is something most people don't even know anything about, sadly. But it is something that I could help anybody with.
Well, I'd be delighted to hear it. So,
Okay.
All right. Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Salvador. We have 2 hands currently raised. Let me go to Yusuf Ismail, who's a South African Muslim apologist, and then we'll go to Gunter if he has more comments, which I think he does, and then we'll go to Blake again. Let me bring up Gunter. What means our Yusuf first. Yusuf disappear.
We lose somebody?
I'm not sure. Yusuf had his hand up.
By the way, I should have asked, how is the sound here? Because
sound is just fine.
Okay, because I've gotten a couple of recordings where it sounds tinny. It sounds like it's on a telephone, but people keep assuring me that it sounds good in their studio, so I don't understand what's up with that.
It sounds just fine here.
Very good, very good.
Ismail, I presume.
Somebody says, in 20 seconds, what's the best evidence for evolution, in my opinion? That would be systematic phylogeny, the classification of life forms. If you want to look up a video on that, that would be the phylogeny challenge.
All right. Well, greetings, Yusuf. You can turn on your webcam if you want to, or you can just use your microphone, whatever you wish.
Hi, Jonathan. I think I lost contact with you. The network's pretty bad here in South Africa. Hello, Aaron. How do you do?
It's all right. It's all right. How's South Africa?
It's good. Yeah, it's lovely. We're actually nearing winter. I've been just listening to a few of you. I come obviously from a Muslim background. I do believe you may have had engagement in Ireland with Hamza Zorsis and Adnan Rashid.
Yeah.
It was some time back. Actually, I may go off topic, but actually related to some of the discussions. Yeah, I just came in pretty late.
Did you see the other video that I did for the another one of the IERA, who was speaking at Coventry College to arguing on Darwin Day of all times that evolution was not a fact?
No, I'm not. I hadn't seen that yet. I'll
Okay.
probably look at it.
I made a video, 20 minutes or so, explain it, or maybe it's longer than that, I don't know. But
Okay.
I made a video addressed to him explaining how he got several things wrong and why evolution is a fact, if you'd want to check that out. But go ahead.
Okay, I'll look at that. But speaking about evolution, since you raised that particular issue, I don't know your background, whether you're a scientist. I know Jonathan's a cell biologist. As I understand it, and I'm not speaking from a science background, I'm from a legal background, so bear my ignorance should I display anything here. As I understand it, in the 18th century, or the predecessor to Darwin, Lamarck, who was the French biologist, he basically postulated the idea that living creatures, passed on traits that they in fact acquired from one generation to the next generation, and that in fact caused a new species to be born. And I think Charles Darwin, in The Origin of Species, when I looked at it, he postulated something similar. But that theory subsequently became debunked, I think, in the 19th century by Mendel, where it totally demolished the idea that acquired traits were passed to subsequent generations. And
That's
as I
correct.
understand it, subsequently Darwinists came up with the whole notion of modern synthetic theory, which
I think you're getting some things confused. Lamarckism was the idea that when they say acquired traits, they're not talking about mutations that would then be passed down to your offspring. They're talking about if you work out with weights every day, your children will be born stronger. One of the experiments that they did to disprove that was, I mean, there was a series of mice, and they would keep cutting the tails off this one generation of mice to show that the new mouse babies would not be born tailless. So whatever happens to the parent has no impact on the offspring. You had to have what Darwin proposed, which were inheritable information from both parents, and his theory was vindicated by Mendel. Mendel discovered the key that Darwin was looking for. And in fact, Mendel even sent a manuscript to Darwin, as I understand it, relaying this, although Darwin never discovered what it was. So it was actually in obscurity for some time.
Yeah, but as I understand, what Darwin suggested was natural selection, the idea that living things that are stronger and more suited to the condition of the environment, in fact, survive in the struggle for life.
And Darwin specifically said that it was not the stronger that survived. He actually he clarified, it's not the stronger, it's the most adaptable.
It's the most adaptable, whatever the case is. But as I recall in The Origin of Species, he said that natural selection can effectively do nothing unless, of course, favorable variations chance to occur. And the point is that Lamarck, who was his predecessor, did in fact suggest, I think, gave the example of the giraffe evolving from the antelope based on the fact that they struggled to eat the higher leaves, and so their necks were extended from generation to generation. And I think Darwin pointed something similar, where he argued that bears going into water to find food, in a sense, transform themselves into whales. That's contained in The Origin of Species. But that whole notion was demolished by Mendel, and I think modern day neo-Darwinists.
I'm a little confused. The notion that was vindicated by Mendel, you're saying was demolished by Mendel. How so?
Well, as I understand it, if you look at The Origin of Species, the first edition, the one that was published by Harvard, I think on page 184, Darwin in fact gave an example of the example of bears going into water and finding food, and then eventually transforming into a totally different species. If you look at the laws of inheritance, which were discovered by Mendel in the 20th century, they destroyed the idea that acquired traits were passed on to subsequent generation, and therefore the neo-Darwinists relied on the idea of mutation. And so natural selection.
At this point, we're not talking about neo-Darwinists, because you understand what a neo-Darwinist is somebody that incorporates the natural selection and sexual selection that Darwin proposed with Mendelian.
Well, as I understand, Aron, neo-Darwinists added mutations, that's distortions in the gene.
No, they already understood
factors, such as radiation.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. Darwinism is natural selection and sexual selection. These are the things that Darwin proposed. And then,
I understand that, yeah.
And as I said, he predicted the inheritable units, and he wasn't sure what this mechanism was. Mendel discovered what Darwin's mechanism was, and so those who incorporate Darwinian selection with Mendelian genetics are defined as neo-Darwinists.
But as I understand, I mean, in long and short of it is that neo-Darwinists would argue that factors or external factors, for example, radiation, replication errors, etc., result in mutations, which then cause favorable variations in addition to natural mutation, as I understand it. And now, the model that exists today in the world of biology is that millions of living beings present on Earth, they form as a result of a process whereby complex organs are formed as a result of mutations, that is, genetic disorders. Now, my question to you is that and maybe Jonathan could also come in this, as a scientific fact and as scientific evidence, mutation by definition do not in fact cause living beings to develop. On the contrary, they always cause harm. We don't have a single model.
Would you like a list?
We don't have a single scientific model where mutations lead to favorable improvements in the individual. Invariably,
my book includes
always distortions.
I'm sorry. My book includes, I think, a dozen more examples than what our science textbooks also include. But where you say that there's not a single exception, there are many. There are dozens of specific examples we can give of definitely beneficial mutations where they have charted exactly which mutation happened, how, and what was the benefit.
Well, I've got an interesting book here. Actually belongs to my father. He's a mathematician, by the way. It's written in the 80s. It's called Origins, a question mark, by an Indian, I don't know if you're familiar with that, B.G. Ranganathan, and this is what he says.
Oh, yes, I'm unfortunately, yes, I'm very familiar with B.J. Ranganathan. He got a bachelor's degree, not in science, but in art. He has absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. He got his degree from a religious institution for religious purposes. He has no science understanding, and his book was criticized by those competent in science, saying that if you haven't spotted a half a dozen obvious errors in the first couple of pages of this tract, then you may need to go back to junior high.
Okay, well, look at what he says here in this book, and you tell me if this is scientifically plausible or implausible, Aaron. This is what he says.
First, I want to stay on topic.
Yeah.
You said there was no single example of a beneficial mutation.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
I have a pretty good list here with specific examples. Would you like me to go through any of the items on this list, or would you concede now that there are actually beneficial mutations?
Well, as I understand, pertaining to the complexity of species, mutations do not basically result in improvements leading to positive benefits to different species. I think.
So you do want me to go through a list of some of my examples? I've got several of them. I've got examples for the enlarging of the human brain, for the gracefulization of the jaw that was correlated with that, with the elimination of impacted wisdom teeth. There's another mutation that prevents that by causing a null growth, and they're actually trying to promote that mutation now.
You're saying the enlargement of the human brain was as a result of mutation?
Yes.
What's the evidence for that? What's the evidence for that?
I cite the papers in a couple of different sources. I cite it in my book, but I also cite it in the video that I mentioned before, the phylogeny challenge. That example is also in there. I do have a list of beneficial mutations in another video that I made on the 11th foundational falsehood of creationism. There's a list of beneficial mutations there. Do we need to go through a specific example? Because I want to get an admission from you. You said there are none. There are actually many. And they're documented, and I want to see what it takes to get you to change your mind.
Well, let's speak about the enlargement of the human brain. What was the intermediate form? Because if mutation resulted in the enlargement of the human brain,
the intermediate form.
What was the intermediate form in that case, and where's the evidence of the intermediate form?
It was a tumor. It was a tumor suppression gene that was disabled, in concordance with another mutation that was for the gracefulization or for a reduction in the jaw muscles that humans have, which in the larger apes, they have these huge muscles that attach to a sagittal crest at the top of the head. This one mutation cut the musculature in half so that the muscles no longer connect to the top of the head. And then that, in concert with the disabled tumor suppressor gene, actually enabled the brain to enlarge. There are a number of other genes that we have that, one of the detrimental ones, no, I won't do it. That was an interesting one.
Yeah, but hang on, you're referring to a different species entirely. Am I correct? You're speaking about the ape.
Well, we are apes. Yeah, when I say the ape, we're
that's the assumption. That's the assumption. I asked for
this is a demonstrable fact we can verify to prove.
Okay,
it's not an assumption. Humans are apes. They are classified as apes, categorized as apes, because we have all of the characters required to meet that definition.
Well, if that was the case, Darwin himself said, I believe in the Origin of Species, that if his theory is true, then and what you're basically postulating something similar, then there would be numerous intermediate varieties linking most of the closely. But it's not there. It's absent in the fossil record. You're aware of that.
We have dozens of them.
No, but you
if you were looking for an intermediate species, so science has proposed, and by the way, where you say there are none, again, there are many. We've got dozens of intermediate species. You're going to say there's zero. I'm going to say there are dozen. And the problem is you can't point me to zero, but I can point you to dozens. I can show you the examples. So just to prove this to you, if you were looking for, if you want to verify whether something is an intermediate species or not, you have to go with what, you know, we were talking about the apes that existed in Darwin's time, which still exist today, most of them, and modern humans, or actually not even modern humans. By Darwin's time, they already knew about Homo erectus. Now, Homo erectus already meets your criteria, but we're actually going to draw a line between the modern apes to Homo erectus. We need to find something that has intermediate traits. So can you give me an idea of a handful of intermediate traits between apes and humans?
Well, I would assume fingers. The fact there's certain.
Well, we all have fingers.
Yeah,
we have, in fact, the same fingers. This is one of.
But I think we're jumping from one topic to the other. We're going from mutations to. I mean, my idea, and I'm not a biologist. I'm an expert. But you've raised Aaron. You've raised the idea of Australopithecus Homo erectus.
You knew about it. You said there were none, but you already knew. Why would you do that?
No, because what happens if you look at the categories that are listed? They generally list Australopithecus, I think Homo habilis, Homo erectus.
So you're aware of a number of them, but you said there were.
I'm aware of the existence, but if you look at research that's been conducted,
do they meet the criteria or not?
Well, Charles Oxnard, Solly Zuckerman, for example, they argue that the Australopithecus specimens that were discovered in England, they were in fact
there were no Australopithecus ever discovered in England.
I'm sorry, there were specimens.
There were no. Okay, you might have Cro-Magnon, but that's it. If we're talking about transitional species between humans and apes, you're not going to find them in England. They're in Africa.
As whatever the case is, as I understand.
So regarding the ones that you just mentioned,
yeah,
do they meet the criteria of a transitional species or
no?
not?
They don't. They don't. They
How
don't.
do they
And the
not?
reason. Well, the fact is, science or certain scientists have argued that they in fact belong to ordinary ape species that became extinct. They bore no resemblance to humans. One is Charles Oxnard.
So they don't have fingers, like you just said?
No, they certainly do.
Do they have fingerprints? Do they have flat fingernails?
Of course they do.
Do they have ears that look like this? Do they have ears like this? Because I tell you, there's only one animal on the world that has ears like this. There's a whole bunch of them. They're called monkeys. Only monkeys have these ears, by the way.
Yeah,
if you have these ears, you're a monkey.
Aaron, I think what you're doing is you're looking at certain observable criteria and then arguing.
Yes, I am. I'm looking at certain observable criteria, and this is how it's going to refute your argument. According to reality, regardless of what anybody else says about it, let's look at the actual traits. If you're going to find intermediate species between humans and apes, what are the traits you're going to look for?
If you look at Ernst Mayr, who was one of the foremost defenders of the evolutionary theory, he admitted the fact that the chain reaching as far as Homo sapiens is actually lost, and so many of these.
Maybe in 1940 he might have thought so, but as you're aware, Australopithecus afarensis wasn't discovered until 1974, so it doesn't really matter what he wrote in his book in 1940, does it? So getting back to my question. On the intermediate traits, you said there was no resemblance to humans, and by that you meant that there's every resemblance to human. They have the same ears. We have the downward turned nostrils, which identify us as catarrhine primates. We have fingerprints. We have flat fingernails. These are all indicative traits of monkeys. So if we can get off of the resemblances, which everybody recognized and no one disputed until you, that we have these resemblances to apes, we're now going to draw a line between the apes that exist that are not human, and we're going to draw a line to humans. So
here's the problem. Here's a problem that you raised.
We're looking for intermediate traits. So give me an example, 2 or 3 of them, if you would, for intermediate traits. What traits would we look for in a fossil species to identify whether it is a transitional or not?
Well, obviously, your question takes me to another issue, which, of course, if there's certain traits which show the transitional process occurred. But the problem we have is that. Well, let me come to that. But here's the issue. Most of the, I think, recent findings of paleoanthropologists, they argue that Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus lived in different parts of the world at the same time.
That's right. Homo erectus was all over the place.
Well, now, if they lived at the same time, so how then can you argue, which would be your particular position, that one evolved into the other? It doesn't make sense, because what it does go to show that the different species in the same world itself.
Hello? Give me those 3 again.
Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus. And I'll in fact give you the source
at the same time. But even if they did, Even if they did, because there is some overlap.
If you look at
Hold
Alan
on.
Walker in Science,
Okay.
Volume 207,
Right.
1980.
You understand that Australopithecus afarensis dates to 2.2, 2.3 million years ago, right?
I heard of it. Yeah.
Whereas Homo erectus, the earliest ones are, I think, 1.8, something like that. Now you're going to have an overlap because they're going to flower out. I mean, it's just like when people say, well, if they came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Well, dogs came from wolves, and there are still wolves.
So you saying they evolved at different times? Are you saying they evolved at different times?
No, they all evolved continuously.
Well, if they evolve continually, how is it that you have different species living at the same time? If Homo habilis and Homo erectus and Australopithecus lived at the same time, one cannot evolve into another. That doesn't make sense.
They're evolving. They all evolve at the same. They're all evolving constantly. Now, but what you have is from each group, you have one that flowers or buds out to the next group. Now, that doesn't mean that all these others are extinct yet. They don't have to go extinct at all.
No. But the chain which we're presenting, Aaron, is that Australopithecus evolved into Homo habilis. From Homo habilis, you get Homo erectus.
Right,
and
but
then
you understand
that
when the first Australopithecus is around, Homo habilis doesn't exist. Homo erectus doesn't exist. Now, when the first Homo habilis is around, there are still Australopithecines, and there might be some left when the first Homo erectus is around. There are still Homo habilis when Homo erectus is around. There are still a few Homo habilis, obviously, because they're emerging from within each other. Of course, your family still exists. Your grandparents, your great aunts, and all like this still exist when you're born.
So they never evolved into me. That's the point. You see, the problem is if you look at the last chain, Homo erectus, which is the kind of predecessor to Homo sapiens, if they existed at the same time that Australopithecus existed, how can one argue that
they didn't exist at the same time as Australopithecus?
Well, science. There are certain studies that indicate they did. There's certain studies that indicate that. How do you get around that problem? How do you get around this? It
depends on which one you're talking about. Because if you're talking about Homo Australopithecus afarensis, no. If you're talking about the Australopithecines, also known as Boisier, sometimes reclassified as Paranthropus, then yes. But that's a different group.
But look at what Stephen Jay Gould stated on this particular point. He says, "What has become?"
Again, I'm trying to get you to simple yes or no answers so that you can understand the failure of your argument. You said there are no beneficial mutations. I can present you with a list of them. Would you like me to go through the list of them, or would you
agree with me that the vast majority of mutations lead to harmful?
Yes, I would agree that the vast. So I wouldn't say vast, but I would say the majority. The majority of mutations.
So what's the probability of a mutation?
I'm not even sure about that because most mutations.
What's the probability of a mutation leading to such a complex improvement? I mean, like the technology in the eye and the ear. How is it possible that a mutation?
These are not the product of a single mutation. It doesn't work like the X-Men. It's not like you get one mutation and it changes your entire body. You have to have multiple.
So you need a multiplicity of mutations, and the chances are that all those mutations are going to be positive. Well, what's the probabilities of that?
The chances have to be that they're all positive.
Well, if they're negative, then you don't have any.
Understand it. You were born with an estimated average of 128 mutations right from the zygote. Every human has an average of 128 mutations right from the moment you're born. Do you understand that? And you're going to have concerted mutations occurring as your genes replicate throughout your life, right?
Well, define that. Can you define that? Yes. Define that.
What?
Can you define that? What do you mean by that? Complex mutations in the course of your life. Define
complex? That. What is a complex mutation?
Well, something which leads to the formation of a complex individual, a complex human being.
You're asking again for a single mutation to do the job of many concerted mutations. Why would you? You can't have one mutation lead to a whole different individual. I said many concerted mutations. Now, within humanity, we can show which mutations were inheritable and caused some specific changes. They're mapping out more all the time, but they've identified some of them. So there are beneficial mutations, not just within humans, but within other species as well. Do you concede that beneficial mutations do in fact exist and have been documented and are in your child's textbook right now? Well, no, maybe you're in South Africa, so you probably don't have them in your textbook. I'm in Texas, as accurate as it can be, and it's in our textbooks.
You'd be quite surprised.
We have lists of beneficial mutations in Texas science textbooks. Do you admit that?
Aaron, as I understand it, and again, I'm speaking not as a scientist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not trained in. So my dad is, by the way. I'm in the legal field. As I understand it,
concede that there are? Will you take my word for it, or do we need to go through the list?
Well, before I go through the list, I just want to point out something. Generally speaking, mutation, which is presented as an evolutionary mechanism, it's actually a genetic occurrence that basically harms living beings. It leaves them disabled. I mean, the most common mutation would be cancer.
Usually,
you agree with me?
It doesn't
so how can scientifically, how can a scientist show by evidence that a destructive mechanism can be an evolutionary mechanism? Because natural selection on the other thing,
because it's not defined as a destructive mechanism.
I beg your pardon?
Because a mutation is a change. It's not always destructive. It's not part of the definition.
99% of the time, mutations are destructive. So how can a destructive mechanism lead to a positive change?
That's not correct either. It's not 90% of the time or 90% of the time. It's not, it's not 99% of the time. It's not even 90% of the time. Most of the time, they're neutral because you don't have any effect at all, either positive or negative. They have to be inheritable, and then they have to have some kind of significance for there to be a benefit or a detriment.
Okay, let's look at it from this. As I understand, mutations rarely occur. Do you agree with me on that point?
Certainly. And do you accept that there have been a number, exceeding dozens at least, of specific identified mutations with definite benefit?
I'm not aware of them. I'm not aware of it. My understanding is that my understanding is that the characteristics of mutations imply that mutations cannot lead to evolutionary development. If you look at a random change, a random change in a specified organism, it's either ineffectual or harmful. So a random change in a watch cannot improve a watch, right?
We're not talking about things that have to be built. We're talking about things that reproduce on their own. And they reproduce with subtle changes. All of these subtle changes, by the way, are produced by mutations. The difference between your children, the reason they don't look identical to each other, even if they share the same mother and father, is because there were individual mutations that divide them.
So are you saying that the mutations created the variations as a result of the... And what's the scientific evidence for that?
Seriously?
Well, what's your scientific evidence for suggesting that it's mutations that cause the variations in human beings?
I did just tell you that I've cited...
There's none. I mean, there's none, Aaron. You cannot make the claim. I mean, that's a bold statement.
Okay, I've already told you that there are beneficial mutations in our textbooks, and you're going to tell me that they're not there. And you're going to deny now.
You're going to state the variations.
You're going to tell me that even though you can look up on PubMed, and PubMed shows that there's an average of 128 mutations per human zygote, you're going to ask me what my evidence for that is? I just gave it to you. I just cited from PubMed, from NCBI. Is there any paper I could show you that would cause you to concede this argument? Because you've been wrong in every assertion you've made so far.
Well, what I found quite disturbing.
After I've cited what the evidence is.
I'm not challenging what you said. What I found disturbing.
Just be specific. You're not challenging me on the differences between different people being generated by random mutations. You're not challenging.
I am. Are you saying that the differences in human beings are as a result of mutation?
Absolutely, yes.
This is the first time I'm ever hearing about it. I read about science.
I realize this is the first time you're hearing about this, and I'm grieved over that. It shouldn't be that way.
I do understand the fact that if that was indeed the case, then certainly there would have been more harm and more destruction.
More harm? Why would there be more harm?
Well, generally speaking,
the reason things are the way they are is because there are tiny, subtle differences that occur in the genome for every person.
Yeah, but that's not a mutation. That's not a mutation. The fact that there are variations.
You know what a mutation is?
That's not a mutation. How is that a mutation?
Every human zygote has 128 mutations on average. So, what do you think a mutation is?
Mutations are small, harmful changes.
Not the word harmful.
Well, they don't
have to be harm. I've just told you we've got lists of beneficial mutations in the high school textbooks, And you're going to tell me that they don't exist, that they're not even in the textbook, because I need to provide evidence that mutations occur in humans after I've already provided the evidence that that occurs in humans? So I'm guessing then that if I name any paper, you'll dismiss it for whatever reason, and because I've already given you the average that medical science has already produced, and you're saying, what is your evidence for that? What an outrageous question. I just told you I could look it up. You could look it up. You could look it up on PubMed.
Okay. Well,
let's maybe go over to Günther, because Günther's been waiting patiently for a little while. Günther is a...
And then when I want to get back to you on the fact that beneficial mutations do exist, and many transitional species do exist, and I'm gonna press you to give me what the traits are so that we can identify beneficial mutations. And I think the reason, intermediate species, and I think the reason that you're hesitant to give them to me is because you know that they exist. And you have to defend the belief system even when you already suspect that it's wrong. I think that's what's happening here.
Günther, go ahead.
Right, thank you. So I would like to make a few quick points and then come back to let's say, the main issue of the debate, because we have gone far astray from the main issue. Some general points. You said that there are dozens of intermediate fossils. I think that is a vast understatement. There are thousands of intermediate fossils.
No, I'm talking about intermediate species.
Or intermediate species in nearly every group in studies. So that is very clear. The problem, though, is I think there is a lot of misunderstanding in the debates between creationists or intelligent design proponents and Darwinists or paleontologists, is what they mean when they talk about intermediate species or fossils. What I say now, we, you and me, mean when we talk about an intermediate species is a species which has retained some primitive characters from the ancestor and has already some of the derived characters of the descendants, and is therefore morphologically in between. And
it doesn't have to be an ancestor. It doesn't have to be in an ancestor-descendant relationship either. It's just that we have...
It can be a side branch from this ancestor-descendant,
where we have a new clade being, its emergent being evident.
Right, and it can have out apomorphies and be on the sideline. That's no question. I just wanted to make the point that there are not dozens, there are thousands. So there's very strong evidence.
I was talking about only within human lineage.
Right. Okay.
So my apologies there.
What I wanted to say,
if anybody's curious about this, I made a video on this called "The Ninth Foundational Falsehood of Creationism," where I list about 300 transitional species by specific definition.
So what I wanted to say is this misunderstanding is that's what we mean when we talk about intermediate species. Many critics of let's say neo-Darwinism, what they mean when they talk about intermediate species or fossil evidence for this is fossil evidence for gradualism, for gradual transition. And indeed, there is very few, I wouldn't say nil, but it's only 2 or 3 examples for really gradual transitions. There's a reason why people who really know the fossil record, like Eldridge and Gould, came up with a punctuated equilibrium. So there are gaps in the fossil record, and there is a debate: is it gaps of are those gaps of evidence for gaps, or are they?
I am unaware. I am unaware of these gaps, nor am I aware of a single example that does not qualify as gradualism.
Actually,
give me what the argument is.
I can only give, and I know the fossil record very, very well. So I can only give you 2 examples for gradual, for really good documentation of gradual evolution, and that would be one is a group of fossil protists in Atlantic sediments, where you have for a long time sedimentation, and you can follow some slight changes through time. And another example would be some freshwater snails. Maybe
another example would be
what is meant with gradual transition. It would not be sufficient for fossil evidence to qualify for gradual transition to have, let's say, Australopithecus afarensis, and then Australopithecus gari, and Australopithecus name it, and then Homo habilis, and so on. You still
I've got a couple of ammonite fossils, and I don't have the orthicone, minor the helical, but just that is an example of gradualism. And then within the helical, they are of different species as well. I've got one with the fine gradations, I forget what they call it, the little lines that go through the shells. It's very ornate, right? One's very simple, deep carved lines, and then one has very subtle lines that are very beautiful in detail. These are examples of gradual evolution. Everything I can think of is going to be an example of something that took many generations to acquire, whereas the counter argument is going to be one thing giving birth to a completely different thing. This is what creationists are arguing for when they argue against gradualism. They're arguing for the sudden eruption of a completely new thing, something that did not evolve. But we know.
But actually, this is what is in a way suggested by a vast majority of the fossil record. And I would challenge you for the ammonites to give the stratigraphic evidence to show that what you consider as gradual evolution, that this fits, let's say, with because that would imply also a temporal succession. So what you would need to establish is show that you have ammonites of successive stratigraphic layers, which are also connected biogeographically, where you have a gradual change from one species to another. And that is what is meant with
But evolution is a proliferation of species. It's a theory of biodiversity. So I got these two ammonites of very different, of obviously different species from the same strata, but they're different species. So
yeah, but then it's not evidence for gradualism. Then it's evidence for occurrence of two related species at the same time horizon, at the same place, which may or may not have had a common ancestor slightly before. But
how many generations does it take to produce a different species? I mean, even Jay Gould.
Depending on the groups, we don't know. In some groups, it's maybe some 100,000 years, and others it may take some million years. But
it's always going to be gradual, according to the creationists in the argument. There's never going to be the situation that they're looking for.
Yeah, but what I want to say is the fossil evidence doesn't really show the gradual transition. It shows.
Okay, so when we have stages. So in the tetrapod line, which is going to be the most dramatic, right?
Right.
Where you make the transition from sea to land. This is going to be.
We can take the tetrapod evolution. I know it quite well because I organized an exhibition on it. The problem in tetrapod evolution is if you take Tiktaalik and you look at the end, we have no transitional fossil for the transformation. We have the transitional series, let's say, for the gill apparatus. We have transitional fossils for the femora and the other bones of the hands and legs. What we don't have is transitional fossils for the transformation of the hand. We have on one hand, there is still a fin with the so-called ceratotricha, which is interior skeleton, and which is ectoskeleton, ectodermal produced skeleton material, and then you have suddenly appearing real finger bones, which is endoskeleton.
Well, no, not quite yet, because you forget there is that one intermediate stage where it's the different hand bones, but they're not in any kind of a hand-like configuration. It's more like a claw.
No, but that would only qualify for the wrist, but not for the fingers. So the fingers are appearing absolutely suddenly.
Yeah, you don't have the digits yet, but you do have the beginnings of the wrist.
You have beginnings of the wrist. That is okay.
When you look at the dates on this,
but still you have a gap. And the problem is that in nearly every group, you still fossils are coming in, and we, let's say in Darwin's time, you said, well, probably it's a kind of sampling bias, and what we need is we know so few localities, and so now we have discovered hundreds of localities and thousands of fossils, as you said, in the tetrapod lineage.
So all of these transitions from the like Pandoricthus,
right,
on up through what Ichthyostega or what is the other one after that? Never mind, I can't remember its name.
Ichthyostega would be basically.
Yeah. All of these hail from exactly 360 million years ago, right? They don't hail from.
There are some million years.
Okay, so that's gradualism. So we've got millions of years. In the most dramatic of all of our changes is still spaced over millions of years. And that's the fastest. That's the one of the most selective pressure.
Yeah, but the problem is all those fossils, they are found at the more or less the same region. They are found either in Greenland or northern part of Canada. A lot of them, as you said, come from the same strata, so they were contemporary. You still put them into a transformation series because you have these intermediate morphology.
Right, so it's
but what you don't have is a transitional series through time where you can observe that one morphotype was transformed into the other by, let's say, 200 fine steps, where every step qualifies for, let's say, a point mutation or something.
Okay, so we have this transition, the one that is the fastest, the one that is the most selectively pressured and should be the quickest and most abrupt, and yet it's still spanned over several tens of millions of years, and you're saying that that's not evidence of gradualism.
Right. Yeah, I would dispute that this is gradualism. If you still have the gap where figures have to appear.
Okay. I want them to understand that you're talking about a change that took 50 million years, but you're not calling it gradual. They need to understand that 50 million years means abrupt.
No, but we're talking about evidence. You laid a lot of emphasis on show me the evidence. And what I want to say is I don't even dispute that it may be a gradual process, even though I have personally some doubts concerning the neo-Darwinian process. I have no doubts concerning common descent with modification.
Okay, so you understand that it took several generations just to produce the various breeds of dogs. And that's under artificial selection, which works much faster than natural selection. You accept that, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so what creationists want to distinguish between gradualism and this punctuated equilibrium, they have no understanding of punctuated equilibrium at all.
Okay, granted.
They're saying they think that Stephen Jay Gould came up with this to explain their lack of transitional fossils. They don't realize that there's a wealth of transitional fossils. And
right.
Okay.
No dispute there. So only point I wanted to make, I just wanted to make a quick point that was already getting much longer than I intended, is that you have a lot of evidence for transitional fossils, which would, I say, be very good evidence for common descent, but you have few fossil evidence for this very fine-graded gradual transformation. Anyway, other point, you said that there are no pre-humans from Britain. That's not quite true. There's Homo heidelbergensis, which is the European Homo erectus, which is found in Great Britain.
I did specify between...
Not very important. Yeah. Then there was this issue of Darwin and Lamarck, and it is quite interesting if you read Darwin, that Darwin was much more Lamarckist than his modern followers. So, of course, he was... In his time, Darwin was not a Darwinist, so he was, of course, still conditioned by the books he read, and he was not.
For the greater part of his life, he was also a Christian too. I mean, we changed.
Yes, but he was a Lamarckist till the end of his life. Not a full-blown Lamarckist, but a partial Lamarckist till the end of his life.
The difference between Darwin and Lamarck.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, the difference between Darwin and Lamarck. Lamarck proposed a mechanism that does not work, but it's really appealing. So Mao liked it, Stalin liked it, Hitler liked it, because it gave power to your personal ambition, that if you strive to be the better person, that your kids will become a better person by your sheer will.
But actually, there's a resurgence of neo-Lamarckism, because meanwhile we have discovered that there are some examples for a kind of Lamarckian process, and you have probably heard about these genetic studies that if people smoke or there are certain events like hunger catastrophes, that you get certain imprints in the genome, so that you have there's a barrier that is only from the genotype to the phenotype, that it cannot be vice versa, which would be required for a Lamarckian process to work, would be that the Weismann barrier is broken, that you can get from the phenotype to the genotype. And meanwhile, there are examples that this is possible. So this wouldn't establish Lamarckian process, but it shows that he was not completely wrong. He was only for 99% wrong. So, but anyway. So then there was this issue of Frank Tipler and the cosmological argument. I think there was a misunderstanding. He wrote a book together with John Barrow, which is called The Anthropic Cosmological Principle. It has nothing at all to do with God or with the cosmological argument that is championed by apologists. It basically addresses the fine-tuning and the observer selection effect if you have an ensemble of universes, that you can only observe the universe which allows for intelligent beings to exist. So that was one of the things that were championed by Tipler together with Barrow. And Tipler later has become, I've met him at one conference, a very, very controversial physicist, which I asked another physicist if it's still fringe or beyond fringe. So most mainstream physicists would consider Frank Tipler as far beyond fringe concerning physics. He thinks, but he's a Christian, a heterodox Christian who thinks that the universe in the end will produce a kind of supercomputer who will become God and then have backwards effects and so on. Quite weird ideas. Anyway, what I would like to come back to is the original topic of our today's debate, and that is the issue of faith and the definition of faith. And I think Blake, before he had to go, wanted to make the point that even if you grant that all the evidence that apologists claim is nonsense and that people are deluded when they think that this is true evidence, is that when they honestly believe that they have good empirical evidence, let's say from the cosmological argument or from the fine-tuning argument or from other arguments, then they would be honest in their beliefs. So I think it would be a mischaracterization to call their, you could say they are deluded or they have false beliefs, but
then they don't believe in
honest, I think would be a stretch for the definition of the word dishonest. But the main point is that, as Blake said, with this poll among Christians, is that not only if you ask Christian believers if they agree with your definition of faith, is, let's look at Christian
let's look at
commentaries or Christian dictionaries.
Okay. Let's look at me when I was a Christian. I thought I had evidence. I said that in the beginning. And what was the moment that I dropped Christianity? Was the moment that I discovered that faith was required. That was the instant that I realized, oh, this requires faith. I now know what faith is. Faith is believing things that aren't evident.
But that definition of faith is disagreed by, even if you take evangelical.
Okay. So you want to tell me,
Bible.
Okay, you want to tell me that I'm using the wrong definition. Every Christian, granted, every Christian wants to tell me that they believe on evidence. And then the evidence turns out to be an absolute conviction or a philosophical argument, or I feel it in my heart. There's nothing that...
No, actually not. So, for example, a lot of Christians would say, you can take the Bible as a historical document. You do not have to assume that it is divinely inspired. You do not have to
then if you're going to argue that faith is a belief that's dependent on evidence, is that what you're telling me?
I would say that the Christian belief is a belief system that is supported by evidence, not that it is dependent on that.
If you think it's supported by evidence, let's look at that. What evidence do you have that you think supports Christianity?
So if we take specifically Christianity, I think if we look at the Gospels and if we look at the epistles, let's say the Pauline letters, and we only take those documents that are recognized by not only believers, but let's say by atheists.
Okay, but I recognize, I'm an atheist, I recognize those documents as man-written assertions, which we now need evidence to verify. So,
grounded.
What is your evidence that the faith...
But wait a moment. We will not have the time to go through the... I just want to tell you what the
Somebody just said in the chat. Somebody just said in the chat that I have faith in all sorts of things. No, I do not have a belief that is not based on evidence in anything. I do not have faith in anything. Just to clarify.
Do you think that the laws of nature are the same everywhere in the universe?
I can only go by the evidence that I understand it, the objectively verifiable facts and past experience.
But do you believe that if you want to make a case, let's say for a super, you have to accept
these qualify as evidence. I base my perspective, my beliefs, on evident probabilities and past experience, or I could base them on faith. I do not base my beliefs on faith. Now, if you're asking whether the laws of nature are everywhere, I'd have to think about that. For the moment, I would have to say that it's irrelevant. because my mind is going to be made by the evidence as I understand it, and not beforehand.
No, but look, if you're an astronomer and you analyze light, basically what you're looking at is little dots of light, and you analyze the spectrum and you interpret the data that are coming in. What you have is data, spectrum, light spectra.
Somebody wants to ask me a yes or no question. Somebody wants to ask me a yes or no question. Are the laws of nature the same everywhere? I don't know. I can't make up my mind until I have the information to imply it. That's because I don't believe things are safe.
What I want to say is, to interpret those data, you have to assume, you have to make certain assumptions.
You might have to make certain assumptions, yes, but that's not faith.
Yeah, but you don't have evidence that the speed of light is the same in the Andromeda galaxy as it is here. You have to. You only have evidence that.
Do I have evident constants within this universe?
You're right.
Do I have anything to imply that there could be a variance? Can you show me that there's a variance? Is there a possibility of variance?
Yes, of course. Because, for example, the speed of light is different in water than in the vacuum.
Okay.
Dark matter.
Are you saying that if it's in another galaxy, then the speed of light would be different for what reason?
We know that 70% of the matter in the universe is dark matter, of which we have no idea what it is. So maybe the speed of light could be different because it behaves in dark matter different as it behaves different in water.
I'm obviously considering the possibility, or that there could be a possibility, as yet unverified, that light could be variable under different conditions.
Yeah, but if you wouldn't make this leap of faith in...
I don't make leaps of faith. I don't make leaps of faith because faith is the most dishonest position as possible to have. So I won't do that. I won't trust with absolute confidence, because remember, faith is a complete...
No, but that is not the definition. That is your definition of faith.
That's the dictionary's definition, and it's also the definition that is reverberated back through Scripture, not just the Bible, but also through the Bible.
No, actually, no. I mean,
actually, yes, I can pull it up.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I've already cited everywhere that faith is referenced in the Bible to confirm that it's the correct definition. There is not any occasion where it is ever applied that faith is a position arrived at only through analysis of data and evidence.
Hey, Aaron, do you know what Proverbs 14 verse 15 says?
Off the top of my head, no.
Proverbs 14 verse 15 says, "The simple man believes everything, the prudent gives thought to his steps." 1 Thessalonians 5:21 tells us to test everything, hold fast to the good. And we've already heard Ginter cite 1 Peter 3:15, and your heart said about Christ as Lord, and always be ready to give an answer to everyone who has to give the reason, the hope that lies within you, doing so with gentleness and respect, and so forth. So there seems to be.
I wish I could give the chapter and verse citation for "You shall not put God to the test," but that shall be sufficient to negate this argument.
Yeah, that's not talking about faith. I mean, that's not talking about putting him to the test in the sense that you're intending it to be taken. It's in the sense of not putting God to the test, as in not explain not tempting God, as it were. So
I'd like to bring up one other thing.
Not providing evidence for God. I mean, there's certainly, if you look at, for example, the practice of the early church, if you look at, for example, Peter and Paul and Apollos and Stephen and the others in the early church community in the first century, they are described in the book of Acts as debating the Jewish rabbis in the synagogues. Paul in Athens reasons with the Greek philosophers. We have in the 2nd century individuals like Justin Martyr, who debates with a Jewish rabbi called Trypho. Famously, he also writes to the Romans to defend the right to exist of Christianity. We have
in that letter, he writes about how all these stories about Jesus having Herculean strength and all these adventurous feats are stories that we don't have anymore. So we don't even know what stories he's talking about, and I think that's kind of damning.
What particular, do you have the passage in mind?
No, there isn't one.
I mean, the passage in Justin Martyr that you're referring to.
Oh, it's where he mentions that you consider all of the traits or all of the stories that we attribute to Jesus are the same as you attribute to the sons you esteem to be of Jupiter and so forth. In that, he's talking about these like feats of Herculean strength and so forth. These are not stories that are familiar to us. They were familiar in the 1st century because they were the mythology then. So when I ask for evidence, I get well, we have the book of fables And the Book of Fables is the evidence that the Book of Fables is correct. No, because the Bhagavad Gita is not evidence that the Bhagavad Gita is correct. That's just the assumption. And then the other argument that I often hear, which I just saw repeated in the chat, is the thing about you can't know anything until you know everything, and how do you know you're even sane? Because the argument is so bad and so without defense that the only way that the religious perspective can be right is if reality is wrong, and that you can argue that the person talking to you is actually insane and just too insane to know that he's insane.
Do you know what the Greek word used for faith in the New Testament is?
No, I don't know the Greek.
It's pistis, and pistis can also be more appropriately actually translated as trust. And in fact, the Latin equivalent that's used in the Vulgate is fides, from which we get our words confide and confidence, which literally means with faith. And so if I confide in someone or place my confidence in someone, then I am placing my faith in that person. Likewise,
you're talking about a religious context instead of the colloquial context. When you look in the dictionary, it gives both together, and Christians often try to confuse the two. But as I said before, faith is not trust. Faith is a complete trust that is not based on evidence. And when you say pistis, yes, I am an epistivist, if you want to look that up. That is somebody who denounces faith and any belief that requires faith.
Okay, because the word that you use for faith, namely pistis, does have the connotations of trusting in the sense that you call the colloquial sense. Rather than,
can you give the source that this is the only interpretation? Complete trust says who?
Well, this was coming from a dictionary, but as I said, I can get it in any.
Well, I mean, one has to look at the way that the word. I mean, for example, Aaron,
if I may, I don't know how long this was supposed to go on, but I've been 2 hours and 10 minutes or so still arguing the definition of faith.
Let me just give a definition.
There's no way I could concede this to you, because under no circumstances can I pretend that faith is a belief that is based on evidence or that is justified by science.
Okay.
We all know that's not true.
Do you have faith in your wife? Yeah, are you married?
What?
Are you married?
What does that have to do with anything?
Just ask, are you married?
Yes, I'm married.
Okay, do you have faith in your wife?
Did you hear the debate that I had with Ray Comfort when he asked me that idiotic question? And
No, I did.
Well, you wouldn't have asked that question if you'd heard that previous conversation.
But I think it is.
As I said, there's two definitions for faith in a dictionary. The one for the colloquial version that you're talking about isn't in religion. It's not in the scriptures.
Who says who?
Says me. Says you. Look it up.
But that is wrong. If you look it up. Look. If you, I have here
which definition are you going to use? Are you saying that the story about the doubting Thomas is praising Thomas, or is Jesus saying, "Blessed is he who has not seen"? But
Aaron,
which definition you want?
Let me just respond here. Now, take for example, 2nd century church father Theophilus of Antioch, who wrote an apology to Autolycus the pagan, and he actually defines faith as Christians understood it in that epistle. He writes, "Do you not realize that faith is a leading principle in all matters? For what husbandman can reap unless he first entrusts his seed to the earth? Or who can cross the sea unless he first entrusts himself to the boat and the captain? Or who can be healed unless he first entrusts himself to the care of the physician? If then the husbandman trusts the earth and the sail of the boat and the sake of the physician, why then will he not place confidence in God when he holds so many pledges at his hand?" So that's the way that the early Christians understood the word faith. And if you
and it's the same as the modern Christians. Yes, you're still arguing the same fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
No, but you have faith because you have evidence. You trust.
No, you don't. If you have evidence, you don't need faith. Faith is a denial of evidence.
When you step onto an aircraft, you are placing your faith in the pilot.
No, I'm not. Yes. That's a colloquial faith, and I don't use that. I don't use the colloquial division because it causes confusion. I'm talking in a religious context of faith, which is not the context you're talking about.
You mentioned the Thomas incident in John chapter 20, when Jesus says, "Because you have seen, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed." But seeing
and faith is the substance of
Hebrews 11, right? Hebrews 11:1.
But not seen. Yes, all through scriptures, and not just your scriptures. The Quran, as I'm sure you know, and the Bhagavad Gita all describe faith the same way. All religions do.
Okay, let's
cannot make me go against what I know and can show to be true about this.
Let's address
You're
the
going to
biblical
have to
passage.
let this point go.
So,
Right?
so
You're not going to make me express a falsehood. I'm not going to pretend that faith cares at all about evidence because I know better and I can prove it.
okay.
So we will drop this point and maybe continue to another, or we'll drop it and stop here.
Okay, let me just very briefly address the two biblical passages you mentioned, and then maybe we'll finish with Mark McGee because he would like to make some comments. He's a former atheist himself turned Christian. So on John chapter 20, seeing is not the only type of evidence, right? There are other types of inferential evidence which don't require seeing. Thomas was in a privileged position in that he had actually seen the risen Christ and actually could have 100% certainty that Christ had been raised because he actually interacted with him and indeed touched him following the resurrection. We, on the other hand, are in a position that we have good reason to think that God exists, that Christianity is true, that Jesus rose from the dead, as in fact the New Testament contends. For example,
what reason would you have to believe any of that?
Well, that's besides the point. The point is that Scripture, that the New Testament.
Okay, so the Scripture says, and I want to harken back to where we came to the beginning of the show, where I was told that I was made to believe all kinds of nonsense that we showed on TV, like the stories about the 500 people in some little Mexican village that saw the Madonna illuminated in the sky. Well, there's 500 people that saw that, so how could you argue with them? Except, of course, we're only hearing a story about 500 people seeing that, so that doesn't have any quality.
But that's besides the point. The point is that in John chapter 20, it's not saying, blessed are those who believe even though they've not had any evidence. Because in fact, in Romans chapter 1, Paul writes that their evidence, at least for creation, is so strong that people are rendered without excuse. Now, you might disagree with
Romans 1 is an assumed conclusion. It's a logical fallacy.
Yeah. Okay. But at least Scripture maintains
evidence
that we have good evidence.
Is the conviction. Again, I know it because I know. That's the evidence that they're claiming in Romans 1.
Now, I have the faith in the Hebrews 11:1 sense that the sun will rise tomorrow. I haven't seen the sun rise tomorrow. Nonetheless, I have a firm confidence.
You have evident probabilities instead of faith.
When you don't have 100% certainty, then you exercise faith in trusting propositions.
When will I ever need 100% certainty?
You don't have 100% certainty, except
I never will need 100% certainty.
Right, I agree.
We don't ever get that.
Yeah, well, except in very rare cases like mathematical propositions and your own existence, which you can be 100% certain about.
Not when I do math. It could come up anything.
Anyway, Mark has been waiting for a while. Do you want to go ahead, Mark?
Hey, Aaron.
How do you do?
Earlier, you gave a definition of evidence, and it went by so fast, I didn't quite get it all. Could you repeat that? Your definition?
When people ask me what I will accept as evidence, I'll accept anything that qualifies as evidence, and the definition that I use is a body of objectively verifiable facts which are positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with that one conclusion over any other, consistently and without contradiction.
Okay, how does that compare to the kind of evidence that's used in accident investigations, homicide investigations, court trials?
The way that it works is, let's say you have somebody that's dead and somebody owns a gun, so you can assume, well, they have a gun, that means that they're obviously the murderer. However, the person that's dead had a heart attack, wasn't shot. So is the gun evidence? No. Well, how about the person has a gun and the body was somebody that had been shot, but just the fact that this guy has a gun, is that evidence that he did it? Because he owns a gun, lots of other people own guns that may or may not have done it. So that's not evidence, that's just a fact. A fact does not become evidence until it is concordant with or indicative of that conclusion.
Okay, who determines what is fact and what is not fact?
Objectively verifiable. So fact is a point of data. It is either not in dispute or is indisputable in that it is objectively verifiable. So the gun in this case, if the bullet matches the ballistics and the gun has the fingerprints of the assailant, well, now we have evidence. Now we've got something that ties it together.
Okay, that's the job of a detective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To determine whether it is evidence. Otherwise, if the same fact would still be true in either case, then it's just a fact. It's not evidence until it implies one or the other.
Okay, I'm trying to, first of all, understand how your definition works with definition of evidence that I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And the definition that I understand comes from 40 years of journalism. So covered tons of fires, murders, accidents, court trials, school boards. So I've seen all kinds of different evidence and different ways that different.
Where do you see a contradiction or a failing or where's the difficulty here?
I didn't say there was a failing. I'm just trying to understand your definition, how far it goes. Detectives come in and they investigate. They take pictures. They swab. They get blood samples. The body is taken back to the coroner, the forensic coroner, and they do their job. And everything is presented to the district attorney. The district attorney takes a look at it, says, I think we have enough to take it to a grand jury. Take it to a grand jury. Grand jury hears the testimony, says, I think there's enough to send it to trial. So it's a process. What I heard you say, what I thought I heard you say, was that Christianity had no evidence. Am I wrong?
By the definition that I gave, that is correct.
Okay, so there's no evidence for Christianity at all.
Exactly.
Okay.
And in fact, there's quite a bit against it.
All right, so what evidence would you need in order to believe that there is a God?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be the Christian God, because as I said, whether a God exists or not, evolution is still true and the Bible is still wrong, either way. So what indication do we have that there is a God? And the first thing we're going to have to do is determine what a God is. What is a God?
I think some have already stated.
No, I've asked the question of 3 or 4 people, but I have.
What do you think? What do you think a God would have to be in order for it to be a God?
Somebody just said that I have faith in reason. No, I have trust in reason, which is different from faith. Trust becomes faith when it is complete and not based on evidence. Thank you, Rob Ward. All right, so what was your question?
See, that's what you're doing, Aaron. You're jumping to another track, and it's hard to stay on track.
I apologize for that. I saw it always incenses me because it's such a predictable thing. Every time we get into these conversations, it's going to be that the definition of faith is wrong. It doesn't matter that the Bible says this. It doesn't matter the dictionaries, the hymns, the sermons, and all the theologians. It doesn't matter how many Christians say this. They're going to tell me I got it wrong. And then they're going to try to convince me that faith is a belief that's based on evidence. No, that's going to be a lie no matter how many times it's repeated. And I'm not going to concede on that. So we're going to have to let that go. But it's always the first point, and damned if it doesn't stay till the last. So why defend faith at all? If every belief is faith, then that negates the meaning of the word. But I object to it because I'm hearing an assertion of complete conviction for which there is nothing that meets my criteria of evidence to defend it. So my definition remains demonstrably correct.
All right. Do you think that your definition of evidence is correct?
Yes. And Gunter has already verified it.
Do you think you could be wrong?
Could I be wrong? Yes, but Gunter's already verified it.
Do you think Gunter could be wrong?
No, because Gunter got it from a dictionary, so we have concordant sources. This is objective verification. This
Okay.
is between belief and knowledge. I believe the definition is this. Oh, let me look it up. Oh, whoops, see, I knew it. I demonstrated my knowledge.
See, I think the problem is, some sense of a problem here is you will not allow what we believe is evidence to be placed into evidence.
Okay, what do you believe is evidence? And I'll explain why it does or doesn't.
All right, let's take a look at the history of Israel. Israel is a nation.
Okay.
Israel as it connects to other countries, other nations of the time. Archaeological support for those interactions. Is that evidence?
Evidence of what?
Evidence that Israel was a nation and that
Are we disputing whether Israel is a nation, or are we disputing whether a magical anthropomorphic immortal somehow controls all these everyday actions?
What I'm asking is archaeological information, data, evidence for supporting the biblical text?
No.
Really?
Right.
How in the world can you throw out archaeological...
What do I need to throw out? What do I need to throw out?
Well, you just said that you would not allow it in.
I didn't say I wouldn't allow anything. I said there's nothing that I need to decide whether I allow it or not. There is nothing that qualifies as evidence of the Christian God. You said you have evidence that Israel exists. Okay, granted, Israel exists. We also understand that Germany exists and Hitler exists. And when I saw the third Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones met Hitler. Does that mean that Indiana Jones exists?
No.
No. Okay, so Israel exists. Great. India exists too, but that doesn't mean that Krishna exists.
That's not my point.
Okay, so what is the evidence? What is the evidence of a God?
Well, part of it is whether that text is true, that says that it is from God, that it is from Yahweh.
Okay, so we have a document that says that snakes and donkeys can talk, that magic spells work, that the necromancer can raise the dead, that the earth is a flat disc standing on columns. It has a crystal dome over the top with windows to let the rain in. It says that the sun and the moon are both the same size, that they're both lights, and that they're both bigger than the stars, and that the stars can be knocked out of the heavens by a storm and then trodden upon. So we have a book that has been proven wrong on every testable claim that it makes, which makes impossible assertions, and you think that the book of the compilation of fables, which are evidently based on prior pagan fables, is somehow evidence that it is correct. Do you have anything that would qualify as evidence?
I just started to give you some and you threw it out.
You didn't give me anything that qualified as evidence. Philosophical arguments are not evidence. Evidence does not equal argument. Do you get that?
Sorry, I disagree with you.
Okay, all right. Well, then we're at an impasse. We could look it up, but as Gunter's already shown, we can look up.
I don't need to.
Yeah, but
I don't need to look
just a little thing. Aaron is always saying that that I corroborated his definition of evidence by quoting from Dictionary.com. That's actually not true. It refutes your definition.
It doesn't. It exactly matches.
It's something that makes plain.
I said objectively verifiable facts, right? Right. The first definition says that something that tends to prove something, right? Well, how are you going to prove it? I give a more precise version, but that still aligns with mine. I said there's not going to be a significant difference, and there isn't. In order to prove it, I have to show objectively verifiable facts, which are positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with, because that's how you prove things. In a court of law, you have the definition of proof that they use, which obviously isn't the mathematical definition. They have to use a proof is overwhelming preponderance of evidence. So yes, the dictionary.
Yeah, but it also says Brown confirms proves something that makes plain or clear an indication or sign, right. And that allows for a lot more things to be evidence than all narrow definition.
All I did was paraphrase that in a more precise way. But it's the same context.
No, it isn't. It isn't. That is
absolutely ridiculous. Yes. Because in order to prove something, we can look at this analytically. In order to prove something.
Yeah, but you just pick the word that is convenient for your definition.
Do I have to pick single words? I was looking at the whole definition that you found. I said it matched. It does.
No, it doesn't. Something that makes plain or clear an indication or sign doesn't match your definition.
So what you're doing is you're picking a definition. Then you're picking one of them. I'm going to have to go back.
And you're picking one word, and I'm not allowed to pick one of the three options, or?
Okay. I will look it up again. What was it? Dictionary.com, right?
Dictionary.com.
Okay. That which tends to prove or disprove something, ground for belief. And you don't understand how that matches what I said. Objectively verifiable.
Read further.
What?
Read further.
Okay, something that makes plain or clear still matches mine. Now, law gets into a different context.
No. An indication or sign.
What?
An indication or sign doesn't mean proof. You try to narrow.
If you're going to make an indication of
something,
if you're going to make an indication,
evidence.
If you're going to make an indication of something, you're still aligning with my definition, because I said positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with, so that a fact can verify whether, you know, which of
Aron,
the position.
any epistemologist and any philosopher of science would disagree with your narrow definition of.
Except that they don't. Except that I know a lot of philosophers of science, and they agree with me. So no, it's not that any would disagree. No, so far as I know, they all agree. And the
100 years ago when
matches.
Yeah, 100 years ago when positivism was still on vogue, but it isn't anymore because it was
good, because I'm not a positivist. Stop throwing out straw men. Now, I gave you an example of something that would tend to prove something or make clear or indicate, and I gave all these precisely as I possibly could. Now, you say that's not a match. I don't see how that's not a match. Can you tell me how my definition differs?
Yes.
Because mine is a more precise way of phrasing that, but it's still the same thing.
Yes, I can tell you, but you will probably simply reject it. But philosophical arguments can make something plain or clear. Obviously, that is actually the reason why philosophy is a valid field, because it helps to.
Let me speak personally then and say no. Philosophical arguments are only word games so far as
nonsense. I'm sorry, that is complete nonsense, because the whole field of science is impossible without philosophy.
Okay. Yeah, and I admit I subscribe to a particular philosophy, but philosophical arguments still do not equate to evidence. Now, I gave you the specific definition, a scientific definition.
I think we have to settle on we agree to disagree. So
there is cumulative evidence, and it's a process.
What is it?
That's how I came from atheism to Christianity.
What was the evidence that changed your mind?
It took 5 months.
Okay.
And I had to go through because my confirmation bias was anti-theism.
Okay.
Okay, that was my confirmation, but that was my bias.
Okay, I don't have one, so we don't have that problem with me.
Well, you don't have a bias.
That's right. I've eliminated. So what is
good for you? Okay, well, I wasn't
able, the evidence that changed.
I was not able to get rid of my bias.
Okay, what evidence changed your mind?
It was the whole process, and I know you don't want to talk about the philosophy, so we'll just put that aside.
Okay, but yeah, I'm only interested in evidence. So what you mentioned, archaeological evidence.
I believe. Okay. Starting with the cumulative case of let's take a look and see if I can find something in the Bible that is obviously wrong. Now, first of all, because I have a bias against supernaturalism, I threw out anything that was supernatural at all.
Okay.
Talking serpents, talking donkeys.
So you still accept that that's not possible, right?
I'm telling you.
Circumstances can a snake talk, right?
I'm going back 46 years ago to try to help you understand.
Today, 46 years ago.
Because you asked me a question.
Can snakes talk under any circumstances ever?
I have never seen a snake talk.
Can they talk?
Philly, I don't think that they can.
Okay,
so
under no circumstances can a snake talk. Good.
Now, I did not say that under no circumstances. Physically, naturally, can a snake talk? I don't think so.
So, let me just one more definition, if I can just throw this out there. The evocation, the definition of the word miracle, the evocation of supernatural forces or agencies to control or forecast natural events. This is the same definition as for magic. So that's what you're telling me. I would have the same bias that I'm not going to accept unsupported accusations of things that are impossible. I need to see that it is possible. So for me, there would be, if I had changed my mind about any particular thing, I would just tell you what fact changed my mind. Can you do that for me?
I tried.
Are you saying you cannot do that for me?
No, I'm saying that I tried, but you stopped me.
What was the fact that changed your mind?
The fact that changed my mind was 5 months of seeing a cumulative case that point after point after point, I could not.
Give me 3 of them.
Sorry?
Give me 3 of them.
I just mentioned archaeological proof for the nation.
Israel exists.
Israel exists.
Fables from Israel.
Israel exists, and things
the third one was not a fact at all.
I didn't know I'd gotten to a third one.
You did Christ's resurrection, a disputed belief, which is part of the fables, by the way. So you didn't give me a list of 3, you gave me a list of 2, one of them being a fact that is irrelevant, and the other one not being a fact at all.
Well, you interrupted me, so I didn't get to fact 2.
Sure to be quiet that entire time.
A couple of minutes.
Okay, you got it. Go.
Okay. First of all, taking a look through the Old Testament, could I find anything in the Old Testament that I could say that's where it ends, that's where it stops? I removed, first of all, the anti-supernatural bias I had to see if I could get rid of the Old Testament simply through a documentary textual process. I was not able to do that. I got all the way to the New Testament. Could I do it there? Archaeology, textual evidence, taking a look at the eyewitnesses, the statements, the history of the church, etc. I took a look at all of that, and then I looked at this amazing eyewitness testimony. I'd seen a lot of eyewitnesses through, back at that time, about 5 or 6 years in the business as a reporter. And I was amazed at not only what these people saw, what they said, what they did, but what they continued to do. And they did not collapse. They did not fall in on themselves. They did not lose their testimony. They did not begin to turn against each other because life got hard, because they came under persecution. They held steady to the course based on what they had seen with their own eyes. And that's extremely powerful testimony when somebody has seen it with their own eyes. And you talk to person after person after person after person, and they have all seen it with their own eyes, and they're saying the same thing that everyone else is saying. They saw the risen Christ. They talked with him. They ate with him. They listened to him. They learned from him. They saw him ascend into heaven. They went back to Jerusalem, waited for the Holy Spirit. Then they went out and began to preach, teach, and build what we know as the church, the Christianity. It was a very powerful case when I got done at the end of it. One of the people I was talking to asked me a very simple question. He said, do you have any reason not to receive Christ as your Savior? And I'm glad they used the word reason. Did I have any reason? I had no more reasons. And I prayed and received Christ as my Savior. That was 45 years ago. And I found nothing since that time that has changed my mind at all. So that's a basic story.
Okay, so I don't know that you're going to understand the sincerity of what I'm about to say, but you presented nothing that could imply that a God exists. You read the Book of Fables, and apparently were somehow unable to dispute it, even though you'd already disputed it before you even began, which I'm a little confused about. And then you went to the listing of eyewitnesses, for which there are none. We have stories about eyewitnesses, but even when there are eyewitnesses, this is the lowest form of a witness testimony that you can have. So there apparently is not a fact. You have people saying they all saw the same thing, except we got 30,000 different denominations of Christianity all warring with each other, and that's just one out of several religions. If there was a God, you would expect that there would be only one religion. Here's what I notice. When you move from one religion, and people often move from one religion to another, and people in a religion, even though heresy and blasphemy are damnable offenses with death penalties, people still branch off with new heresies, and you have new religions and new belief systems cropping up everywhere, just like throwing a dart everywhere and then saying wherever the dart already landed is your target. But when you walk away from religion altogether, you end up everybody, regardless what religion they come from, they all walk into one eventual truth, the one that we're proposing by science. This is the one everybody comes to when they walk away from religion. So if there is a truth, you would expect there would be one of them, not 30,000 different denominations, all claiming to have the absolute truth as revealed directly by a personal relationship with God or Krishna or Buddha or whoever.
You're forgetting one of the reasons that we have denominations and we have problems that we have an enemy.
Who is your enemy?
Satan.
Satan does not exist.
I knew you would say that.
Of course. I mean, even in your storybook, Most people have this interpretation that the serpent of the garden was supposed to be Satan, even though the serpent of the garden is obviously an adaptation of the serpent who could not be tamed in the Hullapu tree with Lilith and Gilgamesh. But notwithstanding, the first time Satan is mentioned by name is in the book of Job, where Satan is walking around and God and Satan have never had a falling out. But prior to that, he was supposed to have been damned to crawl in his belly all his days. But suddenly in Job, God doesn't even know where Satan came from. Hey, where are you coming from? He has to ask questions of people because he doesn't know. So there's an inconsistency here. Satan is not the character in the Garden of Eden. They can't be. So this is just a human interpretation of a compilation of fables from different origins. You've given me, honestly, sincerely, I tell you truthfully, you've given me no reason to believe otherwise.
Okay.
Okay, and with that, I think we're done.
I do.
Mr. McClatchy, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you.
All right, I don't know how to log off of this, so I trust you can do that for me.
Sure, I can kick you out. There's if you press the end meeting button, it's to your bottom right. You should be able to go.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Well, the pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.